Right, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the first session of the Harambee Prosperity Plan 2 Youth Consultation. Our webinar today is hosted by the Presidency under the office of Ms. Desiree Matias, the Presidential Advisor on Youth Matters and Enterprise Development. My name is Chandri Finis, and I'll be your moderator for today's session. We have an interesting session coming up for you with two very effective panelists that will be sharing with us on the two themes for this session, and that is effective governance and international relations. These are, of course, also pillars of the Harambee Prosperity Plan. If you're joining us from across the country, please do let us know in the chat box which region you're joining us from. I already see that we have commas. You can switch your video on if I call one of the regions out if you're from that region, and just show by wave of hand that you're with us. But also we have a second chat box within the Zoom meeting today. We have a Q&A chat box as well, which you will be able to see on the bottom of your screen. And you can ask all of your questions to the panelists and specifically to the presentations through that specific chat box. The general chat box we will keep open also for greeting and so on. I still see we do have Oshana as well. Oshana region with us, as well as an overwhelming amount of people from the Irongo region and the Khomas region. But we'll continue doing roll call as we continue. Without further ado, let's get our program started. And it is now my pleasure to invite the convener for this live webinar and this consultation, Ms. Desiree Matias, the Presidential Advisor on Youth Matters and Enterprise Development. We welcome Ms. Matias.
Good afternoon, everyone. And thank you very much for that introduction. We apologize for the slightly delayed commencement. We also apologize for the lack of audio-visual in our opening slide. We have taken note of that challenge and we will endeavor to correct it. My name is Desiree Matias, as introduced, and it is such a great joy to be connected to all of you this afternoon from across the region. We're from across the country representing the different regions. We are really glad to see the participation of young people from different parts of the country, which shows that you are eager to engage with us and that you have honored our invitation. So we would like to say thank you very much. It shows that distance is not a barrier. Thanks to technology, no one should feel left out. We are all able to connect and to have one conversation on one common agenda for a more united, inclusive, and prosperous Namibia. So thank you very much. I should also convey the greetings of His Excellency the President, who is aware of our interactions this afternoon. He wishes us well. He says we should have a great time, but we should have a productive and a fruitful discussion and exchange that will inform his plan for the second term. I am honored to have with us in the room our Honorable Deputy Minister of Youth, Sport and National Service, our own Emma Kantema Gaumas. I'm also pleased to introduce the Presidential Advisor on Business, the Business Interface and Constitutional Advisor to President Gainkop, Advocate Inge Damwani Kamwe. Thank you very much for making the time. And I have been informed by our Honorable Deputy Prime Minister that she is busy logging on. I see that she has not joined, she's on the call. And it is such an honor for us to have our Deputy Prime Minister and Minister for International Relations and Cooperation, Honorable Netumbo Ndatindeitwa, in the room with us. And this is your conversation, young people. This is your space. You are leading today's conversation. And all the policymakers who are here, including the senior government officials who are attending, are here as keynote listeners. The keynote address is to be delivered by yourselves. We really want to hear from you and to hear your voice, and we encourage you to make your contributions through this platform that has been availed. I will move to just provide a little bit of context of what exactly we are doing here and why this matter is of national importance. Many of you will recall that His Excellency the President has held a town hall meeting in November 2019. At the time, it was at the National Theatre of Namibia, where he met with the young people. And one of your requests at that meeting was that the Office of the President should institutionalize more frequent youth engagement dialogues. And the president on that evening committed to it, and he committed that we would convene quarterly youth engagement fora. So this platform is really in fulfillment of the president's commitment to your request. What I would like you to take note of is that there is a chat room where everybody is able to make their contributions for the whole meeting. But if you have got specific questions that you want to direct to either a line minister or to a senior government official, please make use of the direct private chat where you can address questions to the senior government officials. I encourage my colleagues to respond to the questions and to keep check on the chat room whether you are receiving direct questions that you can engage directly. So this is our third engagement, but today's one is slightly unique. You will recall that on the 4th of June 2020, in the State of the Nation address by His Excellency the President, he also tabled and published his final Harambee Prosperity Plan report, which concluded the end of his first term of office. That Harambee Prosperity Plan report was from the period 2016 until 2020, and it has now reached conclusion. What we are doing here is we are busy reviewing that plan in order for us to inform the policy directives for the formulation of the second Harambee Prosperity Plan. This plan is important because it will be the reform and economic growth agenda for government. The presidency has commenced the process of consultation in July 2020, and it is a process that has been going very well. We've been consulting broad stakeholders, among which we recognize that the youth are a large and a very important demographic, and we want to engage you more specifically in a unique space because we recognize that youth issues are not homogeneous. Young people are not homogeneous. We are faced with unique challenges, but we are also faced with unique opportunities. And we have agency, we have a lot of potential, we have a lot of hope, and it is only right that we can channel that into meaningful policy participation. So this platform is intended to be just that, a policy consultation. What do we expect from this session? What we expect from yourselves as participants is that you will focus the dialogue on reviewing what has worked in the first Harambee Prosperity Plan according to your lived realities, but also to appraise us with a fresh perspective of what's new, what are the contemporary issues, what are the emerging issues that are affecting young people as far as effectiveness and international relations are concerned that could and should be considered in the government's development plan. What we want to create and what we commit to you today is that this engagement is going to be meaningful. The contributions you provide us here are being recorded by a repertoire who is in this meeting with us, and we will have an opportunity at the end of this program to just report back to you a summary of the discussion that we have had. From that report, it is going to inform the drafting work of the policymakers, and eventually it will shape the framework for the second Harambee Prosperity Plan. What we also commit to you is that the feedback that you give us and the final framework from these consultations will be jointly reviewed between the government officials who are represented here and yourselves in a validation workshop. So through this intervention, I want to extend that invitation to you that Wednesday, the 30th of September, as has been communicated publicly in the media, we are also going to convene a validation exercise. And that exercise is really a consensus building exercise to agree that the priorities really are the priorities. I'm sure you will agree with me that if everything is a priority, nothing is a priority. So we must make sure that as we raise issues, we are also looking at what will benefit the majority number of Namibians. What can we do within the financial resource constraints that we have? What is it that could be a low-hanging fruit that has got immediate impact, and some of them may have a longer gestation period? So those are some of the things that I would like for you to consider as we embark on today's dialogue. And I would like to conclude by just saying that the tomorrow doesn't just happen. We have to shape it. We have to design it. And this is really an opportunity for us to come together, to share our lived experiences as young Namibians, to review the policy documents that are shaping and guiding our development agenda. And through this participation, for you to make your voice heard, to influence the formulation of that policy. And as policymakers, we are sitting in the room listening. And I would like to call on the Deputy Prime Minister and also our Deputy Minister of Youth just to greet you and to say that they are here to listen to all of us. Let us have a great time together. And I now yield the floor to Honorable Netumbo Nandi-Ndaitwah. Thank you, ma'am. Honorable Deputy Prime Minister, we are being informed in the chat room that the colleagues cannot hear you because the mic was muted. We apologize for that. If you can kindly unmute.
Okay, is it okay now? I think now you can hear me.
Perfectly. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I was saying to you, Desley, that thank you very much for inviting me to participate in this dialogue. And I want to welcome all the participants. As a member of the executive, we are looking forward to useful discussions as well as an outcome that will help us to have the next Harambee Prosperity Plan even more focused and owned by all of us and implementable so that we can move forward in bringing about prosperity and inclusiveness in our country with the youth as the leader. Thank you very much. I don't want to waste more time because I'm really eager to listen. As you know, 3 o'clock, I have to join another meeting, but I want to make use of the time that remains now just to follow this discussion. Thank you very much, Desley.
Thank you very much, DPM. I would now like to yield the floor to our Deputy Minister of Youth, Sport and National Service, Honorable Emma Kantema Galmas. You have the floor, ma'am. Honorable Kantema Galmas, you just need to unmute your mic and then you can take the floor. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much, Desiree. Good afternoon, Honorable Deputy Prime Minister. Good afternoon to the host, Ms. Matthias, and to all the NAM youth out there. It's indeed a pleasure for me to join this very interesting conversation. And from the onset, I would like to congratulate Ms. Matthias for affording the youth this opportunity. As we all know that where we stand now in the whole world, the youth are the largest population, and it's indeed a privilege to have our youth being afforded that opportunity to also participate in formulating this very important instrument that we believe will help us to achieve the prosperity. Thank you. Looking forward to the discussions.
Colleagues, thank you very much, Honorable Kantema Gaumas. I'm now going to yield the floor back to Mr. Chandre Finnis, who is not only the moderator, but he is also guiding us through the program as that.
Thank you very much, Ms. Desiree. Thank you very much to the Honorable Deputy Prime Minister for her presence today, and as well for the Honorable Deputy Minister of Youth, Sports and Culture for joining us today. We now would like to move ahead, colleagues, but I see there are some more shout outs that I need to give. I see Ochichonjupa is in the house as well. I see we have young people from the Karas region as well, and we have young people from the Kunene region joining us as well. Welcome, fellow young people. This consultation is for us, and this is really an opportunity for us as young people to have an effective voice at the policy table and ensure that our lived experiences as young Namibians are taken into consideration through the planning of the next Harambee Prosperity Plan. Without further ado, I'd now like to invite our second guest. She is Ms. Martha Nangolo, and she speaks to us today on the first pillar that we will discuss, which is effective governance. But just a little bit on her. Ms. Martha is a Namibian research associate at the Institute for Public Policy and Research. And she has been doing research there since 2015, focusing specifically also on effective governance. And I believe she'll tell us a little bit more about herself as she gets into her presentation. It is now my honor to give over to our first presenter, Ms. Martha. The floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Chair. I'd like to stand on the protocol that has been observed by Ms. Desiree Matias and welcoming our Deputy Prime Minister and our Deputy Minister for Youth and Sports and Culture. My name is Martha Nangolo, as been previously alluded by Chandre, and I'm here to talk to you about the first pillar, which is effective governance. Chandre, I don't know if you'll be able to share my presentation. Will that be Desiree? You will?
Yes, we will be sharing it.
Okay, perfect. I'd also just like to state a few things that thank you very much, Desiree, to you as well as the presidency for availing this platform. I made mention when we had the first webinar that this is a very, very great platform, and we as the youth have welcomed it. And also thank you for saying that this is our platform to do and say what we need to do. And on that, I would like to encourage the youth to have some productive conversations and discussions. Let us be respectful in what we say and what we do on this platform, and let us show our leaders that we can rise to the challenge and do what is needed from us. I'm just going to skim through because I recognize the time that you've given to me, Chair, and I'm going to go through the presentation as swiftly as I can, and also just to guide us through the discussions. So today we're looking at the first pillar, which is the first pillar, and it has two sub-pillars, which is accountability and transparency, as well as improved performance and service delivery. And under those, you have 5 targets, and I'll mention that in a bit. And if you go, can you just move on to the next presentation? Just to give us an indication of what effective governance is, because so often we as youth, or not even youth, just general people, we think that we know the definitions, but we have no idea. So these are some of the few definitions that I've been able to source up. What is effective governance? In international development, good governance is a way of measuring how public institutions conduct public affairs and public resources in a preferred way. Governance is a process of decision-making and of processes by which decisions are implemented, as well as looking at some of the processes and institutions that are supposed to produce results to meet the needs of society, while also using our resources sparingly. Now, we can't have effective service delivery without transparency and accountability. Hence why I think this, for me, in terms of the first pillar, is one of the most exciting pillars for me. And it ties into SDG 16, which is an enabling SDG. And without the others, it can't be achieved. And for those of you that don't know which SDG I'm talking about the SDG to promote just, peaceful, and inclusive societies, which is explicitly acknowledging the needs and prescribed to effective governance and et cetera, et cetera. If you continue to move on, you will get an indication of what the pillar aims for. Now, the effective governance pillar has two goals: accountability and transparency, improving performance and service delivery, under which the Harambee has 5 targets, ranging in from increasing the Mo Ibrahim sub-index accountability from a certain point to 90 points by 2020, to looking at becoming one of the most transparent countries in Africa as measured by the Transparency Initiative, retaining position as the country with the freest press in Africa during the Harambee period, ensuring at least 80% of targets are met during year 1. And that was achieved. And lastly, it was to ensure the citizen satisfaction rate of 50% during year 1 of Harambee and 70% by the end of the Harambee Prosperity Plan. And this was almost on target because we achieved 54%, and this was also reflected as well in the final report. Now, just to move forward in terms of looking at where did we fall behind? Oh, okay, that's Desiree. Where did we fall behind? I think you can go on to the next slide. And I'm not going to dwell on everything because the Harambee Prosperity Plan has quite a lot of targets and the different goals. So I'm going to zoom in on some of the things, the key things that I feel is important. And I recognize that this is a youth forum, but when we're looking at effective governance, performance, service delivery, this is not just a demographic thing. It's a everybody thing, whether you're youth, whether you're elderly or young, doesn't really matter. The first thing that we've fallen behind in is fighting corruption. And the reason why I'm saying this is because we have a situation, for instance, where our current ACC's budget continuously gets cut. And I know that as an economist, when we're taught that a budget should reflect one's priorities, we haven't been able to prioritize that. The ACC has been complaining for years, not even the ACC, the Ombudsman as well has been complaining for years that their budget has been cut. So I think this is something that we need to be able to put back on the table. Public procurement still has a lot of shortcomings. And just to give an idea, I mean, we welcome the act in itself, and I think it's a good thing, it's a good initiative, but there's so many issues that still need to be changed. The line institutions still have a lot of issues in terms of transparency and accountability. If we're looking at, for example, the procurement reports that are being given, we can't be having spreadsheets as procurement reports. That doesn't say anything to the types of companies that are being awarded the tenders, what their performances in terms of filling out those tenders are during the time that they've received those tenders. So I think these are some of the issues that also need to be looked at. Media and civil society as support. Now, the reason this is important is because Harambee talks about one Namibia, one nation. Now, as it states, we've seen that, especially from a civil society point of view, in terms of consultation from government side, this is something that's lacking greatly, and it's something that needs to be looked into, to including not only media and civil society, but also just including public participation in an all. Because if this is really our policy document, and these are the action plans that the current administration is trying to focus in on, we need to be able to include everybody. Public participation, which basically leads to a lacking buy-in. If people don't know what's going on, people aren't going to understand. And I think we've already seen that the youth in Namibia, if they don't know something, they're gonna up and they're gonna talk about it. So if you really, really want to be able to have that buy-in from the youth, you need to be able to include us. You need to be able to incorporate us in everything, whether it be the planning, whether it be the implementing, whether it be the monitoring and evaluation stages of the different stages of the Harambee Prosperity period. Citizen satisfaction survey. It is nowhere in sight. Now, I do know and I recognize that it is mentioned in, I do know that it is mentioned in the final report. I also know that it's mentioned in the progress report. But one thing I don't understand is that I don't understand how government can draft a citizen satisfaction survey and give it to themselves to fill out. and not include the customers, which is i.e. the stakeholders, i.e. the citizens, i.e. the youth, i.e. the elder. I don't understand that. Maybe it might be an oversight, I'm not sure. This is something that I would think would be a suggestion from my side, to say that give these out, roll them out through the OMAs. For those of you that don't know what OMAs are, these are offices, ministries, and agencies from government. For instance, Ministry of Home Affairs, give out a survey when people go out and get their birth certificates, etc. And then let the people speak to you and inform you. The last one would be coming up with specific KPIs, which is key performance indicators, as opposed to solely using international indicators. Now, obviously, we need to be able to look at what's internationally recognized by understanding that these are this is a world where globalization is taking place. We obviously want to be in terms of the challenges that are coming about, and we want to be able to see what our partners are doing. But my problem with that is that we overlook what it is that our people are in need of. For instance, okay, I'm just going to continue. For instance, development for someone in Vintu compared to development to someone in the rural areas, Nonesi, is not the same thing. And it's also the same thing in different parts of the world. Development in Europe is not development in Africa. We need to be able to have that in the back of our mind. Let's learn from what other people are doing, but let's be able to adapt it to what our needs are speaking to. Moving forward, what were the wins? Tabling the ATI bill, that was a major step forward. For those of you that don't know what the ATI bill is, access to information, it practically just talks about how both me and you know about what's happening currently in government, have information when it's happening, how it's happening, etc., etc. Ministerial performance agreements, they're very, very important. But one thing that we lack is in terms of consistency. If you go onto the website of the Office of the Prime Minister, you'll find all of the ministers' ministerial performance agreements, which for me, I think is very interesting because it shows you in terms of accountability, what these specific ministers are going to be doing within their certain set periods, which is good to look back to say, okay, no, but you promised us you'd do this and you didn't do it. So how then do we rate it? So this also adds to that. The next point is asset and income declarations by public office bearers. Consistency is needed and it needs to be public. I think in the previous asset and income declaration, we only had the president himself, the first lady, and the Honorable Kalish Ledfine. If we don't know what's happening, how are we going to know where anything or everything is? A very good example would be to look to South Africa, for instance. If you go into the parliament, if you go into the South African Parliament website, they actually have a tab where you can see literally everything from people's incomes that come in, from people's assets and et cetera, et cetera. This is what we need to do, especially in terms of transparency and accountability. These are issues in improving effective governance. Whistleblower and witness protection laws that have been passed in 2008. Up until this point, they are still not operationalized. For me, I don't know what the holdup is. I've been told it's because of finances, but that was 2017. We're in 2020. You need to be able to speak to people. If you'd come to me and tell me, Martha, I couldn't have done this because of A, B, C, and D, and you're consistent in your communication, I won't kill you. But if you keep quiet and you make me look like I don't know what I'm doing, then there's going to be a lot of question marks. So I think also another element is communication. Communicate with people, communicate with the youth, communicate with your citizens. It's not that big of an issue. The last one is, and I think this is one of the biggest wins for me personally, is the e-governance element. If you look at what Ministry of Finance is doing with the ITIS, now you can upload your finance, you can upload your taxes issues, your tax certificates or your taxes online. The online visa applications that were run out by the Ministry of Home Affairs, brilliant. We're catching up with the rest of the world. Yay to us. The customer feedback system that is currently on the Office of the Prime Minister's website. I wish that it could be put through across all platforms, including the Office of the Presidency, et cetera, because this gives citizens a platform to then also come back and say, I have a complaint in this area. As well as the e-birth and the e-death system that the Ministry of Home Affairs. Now, I don't know how this quite works. I've tried to figure out and ask around, but I think that obviously there's still a lot of room in the e-governance area and a lot of other areas as well. I know a lot of things have been ticked off in terms of the boxes. So I think these are some of the wins that I personally felt were good. Now, the next slide is what should we look forward to in terms of Harambee Prosperity 2? Desiree had made mention about low-hanging fruit, which is important, especially for the short term, because we want to be able to give the people something to cheer about. Because as we all know, with the current situation, it's not looking very well. The first point is to operationalize the Whistleblower and the Witness Protection Acts, as well as to operationalize the ATI bill when passed as soon as possible. Now, some of you guys might be asking, why is this important? Now, let me inform you, my brothers and sisters. If you look at the current situation with fish rot, his name was Stephanus Johannes. Someone please correct me. This was the whistleblower from CMRG who came out and actually exposed fish rot for what it truly is. Now, whistleblower and witness protection acts, they save whistleblowers if they want to come out and they protect them so that they don't have to be ridiculed or victimized when they're coming out in terms of them adding to the case. So this is very, very important, especially in the element of fighting corruption. We can't say we're serious about fighting corruption. In fact, the president actually said in the first Harambee Prosperity that he's declaring war on corruption. It's kind of contradictory if you tell me that you have a law that is there, but it's not implemented. Also, you're cutting from ACC's budget. These are two opposing arguments. The second one is assessing effectiveness of the Procurement Act and the necessary reforms. Now, if we're serious about strengthening processes and institutions, of which our current president literally preaches about, and mind you, this has been according to some of the conventions that we've been signed up to, both the UN as well as the African conventions that we've signed up to. And I think this is something that we really, really need to look into. Another one would be improving services for the OMAs. I don't know what happened to the presentation. Okay, improving services for the OMAs by incorporating e-forms. The other day, I saw the Ministry of Education. I was actually blown away. They had an e-form where they were asking parents about what they felt in terms of sending back their students. Why can't we do the same thing for other line ministries or other agencies? For instance, BIPA. New Zealand, it takes 24 hours for you to register a business in New Zealand. Online, by the way. In Namibia, I have to go to BIPA and go stand behind Thomas for I don't know how many hours. I think we should be able to improve this. How? We can put up a Google form. It doesn't have to be a Google form per se, but something in that same line that actually takes out the necessary details and allows you to be able to register your business. It's not that difficult. It's not costly at all. Same thing can be done for Home Affairs in other areas. I don't understand how I have to take certified copies to Home Affairs or to NATIs when they're the ones that gave me those documentation. It doesn't make sense to me as Martha. I don't know. Maybe the colleagues can say something otherwise. But also for them, for instance, 48 hours before I travel or before departure, why can't I just go online, fill out what I need to fill out, go to the to the airport, chip in, chip out without any hassles? There's so many other examples I could give, but I think because of time, I'm going to stick to a few. The last one would be to start implementing opinion polls, surveys across different media platforms. Now, for me, this is a really big one because public participation for me is one of the things that I think as a Namibian, I don't see us at all. In fact, if you look at our open budget survey, Namibia scores 0 out of 100 in terms of public participation. What does that mean? What that means is that our government does not have they don't have formal platforms where they invite us as citizens to ask us, what do you think we should prioritize in this year's budget? What do you think we should prioritize in Harambee? Now, I'm not saying this, and I don't want government to go on the defense because I'm trying to put this out so that you can understand what not only the world sees, but what we also recognize needs to change. Put out opinion polls on social media. Everyone's on Twitter, of course, in the urban space. For those that are in rural areas, every Grand Zali in the north or in the south has a radio station, and everyone listens to Omlunga. Put that stuff on. People will respond. Similarly with newspapers, people read here. So that's the element of public participation. Now, moving forward, what should the second Harambee Prosperity Plan include? It should be accountable. People should be able to, the issues of accountability and transparency should be evident in that. It should be responsive. It should be equitable and inclusive. It should be effective and efficient. It should be consensus oriented. What does that mean? If you come to me and you come ask me for my advice on what Harambee should look like, and I know that you have taken my input and you've put it in there, the consensus is already reached. It should be participatory. You should include my voice. Even though maybe it might not make sense to you, try and reason with me and understand why my point is not relevant as opposed to not saying anything at all. Also, it should just follow the rules of the law. That's an obvious fact. Now, moving forward, how can government further serve the youth through the second Harambee Prosperity Plan? Let us be proactive in making the necessary changes. We currently see that everything is going haywire. Resources are not being efficiently and effectively run. Unemployment is at its peak. People are not happy about how the economy, and I mean, I understand when it comes to external factors, but I know that there's so much work that can be done as well inside. I mean, internally, we should be able to respect the youth. Respect the youth, and not only from government side, also from the youth side. Our youth, for some reason, has become very bold and radical, and they want to tell elders and government off. I don't understand that, because I think for me, mutual respect is something that should be given out. This is our country, no one else's country. I don't have any other home besides Namibia. And if I can't respect my elder, if my elder can't respect me, how are we going to get along? How can we preach unity if we don't have respect? We need to have inclusivity, include each and every person. This is the only way that Harambee is going to be able to move forward. Consult people. It does not make sense if you're buying peanut butter, but I'm allergic to peanut butter. It doesn't serve me in any way. Government is supposed to be serving people. It's supposed to be serving its people's needs. And I think this is where we drop the ball a lot. Accommodate these, whatever. I think you can move on. You need to be able to accommodate people's perspectives. I understand that it can be a bit tedious, but so often I get asked, Martha, where do you come from? I come from Namibia. How many are you guys? 2.5 million. And people ask me, excuse me? Yes, we are 2.5 million. So it makes no sense that most of our people are in abject poverty. I don't understand these. We've got so many resources. And I know there are a lot of technicalities, but we can work around this to make sure that our people's living standards are improved. The last one is guide and advise. Be able to speak to the youth. And I think also another area, especially under, for instance, under what is this, creating employment, the youth need to understand that no government will be able to provide employment. That's not what government is here for. Government is here to create a conducive environment so that it can be able to prosper or thrive businesses in private sector to come and start up industries so that they can be able to create jobs for us, not the other way around. So create that conducive environment for business, because our youth are struggling. Every year we have a multitude of students coming out from Polytech, from NAST, coming out from UNAM, coming out from IUM, and they don't have anywhere to go. And then we ask ourselves, why is crime going high? Maybe because there's no more jobs. Moving forward, what should we as the youth or citizens do? Don't just sit there, guys. Your voice is so crucial. Article 95 from the beautiful Constitution of Namibia gives you that right. Speak up. So often I see the youth on Twitter and Facebook talking a whole lot of stuff that's not even necessary to the development of Namibia. Speak up facts. Tell people what you want. Tell your people, we don't have hospitals. We don't have this. Why are you doing this? Hold them to account. You put your people there. You voted for them. Go and ask the people the questions. It's necessary. Inform and educate yourself. The youth need to start reading. How many of you have actually read the Harambee Prosperity Plan? How many of you have actually read Vision 2030? How many of you have read any of the NDPs? Please inform yourselves and educate yourself so that you can empower not only yourself, but the person that's next to you. If you don't do that, then I don't know how our future is going to look like. Fight for what's right and fair for everybody. Everybody, not only yourself. Oh, wow, that's only coming out now. I think this is the second last chair. I know that I've gone over my time. This is a quote by the president in the first Harambee Prosperity Plan from his forward statement, where he states, I quote, "What is required is an understanding that it is no longer business as usual. We are not only required to act with more urgency to reform processes, we're also required to reform our minds and attitudes and pull in the same direction. A new culture of efficiency and accountability is critical to foster and change, to foster the change that we wish to see." Now moving forward to the last, last, you can move on. And I think I'll end here. No, we'll go back. Yes. For all of you that see that picture, that's current, no? Can you please move to the next? I can't make my point. It needs to be a bang. Okay, there we go. As you can see, that table is empty. No one's at the table. And that's how anything or any policy document that does not include everyone would look like. We've got a huge, beautiful boardroom, but no one to sit at the table to add their views or to complain or to be able to change whatever it is the society is doing. How does it make sense that government is not serving its people, or that the people aren't being able to participate in the affairs of government? And I think this is something that we need to do moving forward together. As Harambee states, that we need to pull together in one direction. Let's not be afraid of being critical or receiving comments from people. Also, when we're giving observations to government, or whether we're giving it to the people, let's be mindful of what we're saying. Is it constructive feedback, or is it just destructive feedback? Because that will also make a big change. I am done, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Martha, for a very informative presentation you gave there. And I think perhaps just my take on the two biggest things that I've gotten out of your entire presentation was responsibility. Responsibility both from us as young people and the expectations of responsibility we have upon the state. But I see our chat room is fired up. I see our Q&A is fired up. So I would now like to officially open the floor for engagement. We want to encourage you to please use the raise your hand button. Please raise your hand button on the system. That way I'll be able to see, and that way I'll be able to give you a platform to speak. If you do not wish to speak and show yourself necessarily on the video, we do have a Q&A box, and I see I already have 4 questions in that box. So if you want to just write out your question, please go over to our Q&A box and you can write your question in there, and we will answer as many of them live as we can, but it is after we have taken comments from the other attendees. So I see I already have 2 hands with me. I have Ms. Martha Willem. She is the Strategic Mission Planning Commissioner for the UN Stabilization Mission in DRC Kinshasa. And I would like to give her the first opportunity to hear her reaction towards this presentation. Ms. Martha Willem, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Andre. And let me start by recognizing the protocol. A very warm greeting to our Deputy Prime Minister, Meme Netumbo, and our Deputy Minister that is also with us. Also to thank Desiree for creating this platform for us to be able to engage and make contribution to the review of the HPP or the next HPP. Also, thank you very much, Martha, for a wonderful presentation. I have very few points to raise, about 4 of them, and really just around the issues of effective governance. And on that, I want to focus on the issue of performance and implementation, more looking at the issues of oversight in order for us to make sure that we do achieve the intended result and impact of all the policies or programs that we're implementing. I think for start, I want to recognize the importance of HPP. It is one of the frameworks that enable us to be able to focus or prioritize on a few key targets that the government would like to see progress on. I speak about HPP also very much aware of what is planned in the NDP5. Before I moved to international with the UN, I worked with the UN in Namibia, and I'm very much aware about the HPP and NDP5. I think I wanted to raise the issue that we need to be cognizant that it's important that when we speak about our policies, and one of the things that Namibia is normally praised about is that we have good policies or programs in place, but where we lag behind or we fail is around implementation, and this is where performance comes in. So as we speak about HPP as review and we look at what we are saying we have done well, and we want to, and where we want to improve in terms of performance, I think it's important that we look at some of these issues. Like, it's very important, and I recognize the importance of our scoring, for example, when it comes to the Mo Ibrahim Index on African Governance. It's also very important when you look at our scoring in terms of corruption when it comes to the international ranking and the regional, for that matter. But I think one of the most important things that we need to take into account is really, does that reflect on the ground? And on the ground, I'm speaking about the lives of the people on the ground. are we talking about, when we talk about how we are ranked in the Mo Ibrahim Index, for example, how does that translate in the human development? Namibia is still one of the countries that we talk about with a very high inequality. How do we look at issues of improving the standard of living? Our people are not going to be eating a very well-crafted policy. We can talk about putting in place all these systems, but the question is, what do we need to do to make sure that really, as we put in place all these frameworks and the policies in place and improving the systems, which are very, very much important, how do we make sure that they are going to be translating into results, into the impact, which is about improving the human development for the people in Namibia. I speak with experience, having lived in some of the harshest environment. I've been working in Darfur, for instance. I know what it means where a document wouldn't mean anything to any other person for as long as they know that they have nothing to eat. So I think it's really, really important that we look at the issue of how do we make sure that everything that we are planning, we ensure that it is implemented. And I think for me, what is important here, we need to look at how do we strengthen our implementation and performance. And I think one of the issues here we need to focus is around oversight. I mean, I'm sure how government implement programs. I also know that there are certain public enterprise or government owned enterprise that are entrusted with implementing certain flagship programs. How do we make sure that we put in place oversight mechanism that ensures effective implementation? And effective implementation is not just about implementing a program that is completed, but ensuring that indeed it achieved the intended result. I think this is where we go wrong. I would want to give an example, but obviously, for example, if I had to speak about mass housing enterprise or program, for example, it wasn't within the HPP, but I did have an opportunity to have some sort of like deep studying on it, and I do realize that a lot of things that we struggle around is around implementation, and implementation in terms of holding to account the people that are entrusted with implementing these policies. How do we make sure that the HPP moving forward, ensuring that it focuses on ensuring accountability? And accountability, we're not just looking at the issues of corruption, but accountability in terms of ensuring that these people are performing. I'm aware that there's HPP and there's also NDP5. In terms of performance reporting, I think there's also an issue here in terms of delinking, or there's a dealing between the two of them. For instance, NDP5 provides, or government ministries are required to provide quarterly progress reports, which are given to MPC, and then MPC, I think, then do this consolidation that will be submitted to the Office of the President. And then HPP comes or requires that the ministries provide sectoral plans to OPM. I don't know to what extent these are harmonized, because for me, it's important that they're harmonized for us to be able to have an overall or comprehensive look at what are we looking at performance-wise. I think there's a problem again in terms of our offices of ministries and entities of government in terms of when they look at HPP and NDP5. I don't think many of them look at them as one document, and HPP obviously being that one that's prioritizes a certain specific target. But I think there is one thing of one being bigger than the other, and we all know that NDPs are going to be here for for life. How do we make sure that the two of them are working together, and then we consolidate the gains that in terms of performance that what is required in HPP is about priorities, but we also need to make sure that the same emphasis is also placed in the NDP5, because I mean, MPC received the largest amount of money for development project, and we need to make sure that we also place the same emphasis in terms of expectation from these ministries in terms of performance. So really, I think my point here is just about ensuring that number one, we are focusing on result and impact. It's one thing for us to be able to have good plans. It's one thing for us to have good system in place, but for as long as we continue to be spoken about the country with the highest inequality in the world, we are going to be seeing more problems facing us. And I think this is where we can capitalize in terms of planning HPP. How do we make sure that perhaps for the next phase, we ensure that the focus here is about what? Performance and implementation, but more looking at oversight, ensuring that all the mechanisms that are put in place, if it is about board members, especially for the state-owned enterprises, they are looking at ensuring that these programs are implemented effectively, and people are not performing, they should be held accountable. Thank you very much. That is all that I wanted to contribute.
Thank you very much, Martha, for your sound contribution. Apologies there. I have Romancia Shonga, who also raised a hand to be the next to give a contribution or ask a question. But before I move on to that, I'd like to remind everyone that let's keep our questions and contributions brief. We almost have 100 participants with us, and I'm sure there's a lot of us buzzing with questions. I will now give over to Romancia Shonga if she still wants to take that question. Romancia, you may raise your hand again if you'd like to speak, but while we wait for someone else to come on, Romancia, the floor is yours. Please remember to unmute yourself when you are given the floor for the question.
All right, great. Thank you for the floor. I'd like to observe all protocols. My name is Romancia Shonga. Yes, so I would just like to concur with Ms. Martha Wilhelm and with the previous speaker, Martha Nangolo. It is something that has come, that comes through a lot in that the way our government runs things is very fragmentary. The way our ministries operate is fragmentary in nature, and oftentimes many of the pitfalls that we see that we're witnessing today is a result of fragmentary planning, fragmentary execution. And so also the fact that as previously had been stated, that when policies are drafted or designed, it's as if people are deaf and blind to what's going on the ground. And that is why, you know, public participation is seen as lacking, because it's just, guys, if you look around, it is really what you will see. If you don't go outside and look around you, and you're writing about a report about your environment or designing a policy about the environment, you will miss the actual need. So I concur with the two previous speakers that really we need to start becoming inclusive. And it's even a reflection, even in just our annual budget allocation. I mean, if we look at this year's budget allocation, even the housing sector has gotten a small budget, but then we've got defense that has a bigger budget. So what does that say about where our priorities are? And I really think that it's those small things that we need to pay attention to if we really want to bring real tangible difference in the way we run our country, because it's really a community project. It's not just the state. So yeah, my 2 cents.
All right. Thank you, Romancia, for your inputs there. We will now be moving on to our next presentation. Yes, but before we do that, we'll be giving one more chance to Esther Zakaria, who has also raised their hand previously to ask a question. And this will be the last question for this session. You are still welcome to post your questions in the Q&A section where they can be answered. And should time permit after the second presentation, we will be allowing you to make more questions and comments on this first presentation. But here's the last speaker for this specific session to ask a question or add a comment. Esther, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, and thank you very much for the platform that our Office of our President has made for us as young people to contribute. I actually have 2 points that I would want to suggest. The first one is on our cultural diversity on the festival cultural. Something I also posted on the comment that can we have our national cultural festival back, because most of us as young people, we do learn a lot from that festival, and it does boost up and grows up and keep our cultural values. And the other thing that I also want to contribute or to suggest is on the the point that our presenter Martha has spoken of on the e-government, that I think it's about also time that our government start thinking of jobs. Either any government positions to be applied using e-government through the Ministry of Labor, rather than having positions whereby young people, most of them are already struggling, and they have to spend a lot in making copies and using and taking transport to go for the police for certifications and buying envelope and other things. I think it would be also better if we can use the e-government for that service for one to apply any vacancy in the government system. Thank you very much.
Esther, thank you so much for your inputs and questions. The Deputy Minister of Youth, Sports and Culture would like to respond to your comments and concerns regarding, I believe it's regarding the National Cultural Festival. So I'll now give the floor to the Honorable Deputy Minister of Youth, Sports and Culture.
Thank you very much, Andre. I'm just going to react on some of the comments that were made, so I'm not going to respond on the National Cultural Festival because that is seized with the Ministry of Education, Arts and Culture. It's pleasing to sit here.
Honorable Deputy Minister, if you could just join us by unmuting your mic so we're able to hear.
I'm on now, right?
Honorable Deputy Minister, please go ahead.
Okay, now I'm fine.
Thank you.
Okay, no, thank you very much. It's really very constructive suggestions coming from the youth, and definitely it's well noted, and we'll have to see how we incorporate it. Firstly, I just wanted to react on the comment that was raised. I think it was Martha from DRC who mentioned the issue of fragmentation in terms of planning and also reporting. I have to say that one thing that the HPPII has really achieved, when you look at that effective pillar, the first pillar on effective governance and service delivery, there are two subcomponents. The second component that speaks to the performance or service delivery in government, where we have signed performance contract. Now, within these performance contracts, what goes in there are the contents of your strategic plan. And in terms of how we've incorporated the planning within government is that the strategic plan is informed firstly by the NDP5, secondly by the HPP. So when you are reporting, you are actually reporting holistically on all these key performance areas that are included or enshrined in this development plan. So I think in that aspect, in terms of HPP1, we have at least managed that, and I do agree there are some of the reporting that was not coherent in terms of the NTPs, but with that performance agreements, we've seen a huge improvement, and I'm sure that in the second HPP will do better. So I just wanted to assure the youth that in terms of that planning and reporting, it was taken care of within the HPP1. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Honorable Deputy Minister, for your input there and your response towards that concern. I trust that brings more clarity specifically to that issue. Well, without further ado, ladies and gentlemen, we'll now be moving over to the second presenter for today. And the second presenter speaks also on the second pillar for today. Her name is Dr. Mekonjo. Dr. Mekonjo serves as a trade attaché to the Namibian Embassy and the Namibian Mission to the United Kingdom. And she will be speaking to us specifically today on the international relations pillar. Dr. Mekonjo, the floor is open for you.
Okay, thank you very much. I will try to, I hope you can see my presentation.
Yes, we can. Please go ahead.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, everybody. And before I commence my presentation, I would like to acknowledge the presence of the Honorable Deputy Minister and also the Deputy Prime Minister, excuse me, and the Deputy Minister of Youth, Sport and National Service. I would also like to thank the Office of the President for convening these important and timely youth consultations on the Harambee Prosperity Plan, too specifically, and thank you very much for inviting me to be part of these discussions. So we're here today to review and discuss the current and also future relationship between the fifth pillar of the Harambee Prosperity Plan, namely international relations and cooperation and the youth. And in my opinion, there is really no better time to have this conversation. And I say this for 3 reasons. Firstly, I think we are living in a time of reflection and review. Now, this is mainly because of the COVID-19 pandemic, which is really forcing the entire world to pause, to reflect and to reassess our priorities, both personal and political. We are revisiting the norms and the concepts and the policies which have really guided and also regulated our lives for a very long time. And we are asking ourselves important questions about these norms and concepts. For example, are they fit for purpose and do they meet the moment? Are they still relevant? So this is really the time to be creative and think innovatively about the great challenges of our time and how we can solve them. Secondly, although there are people who are advocating for many more people are recognizing that in terms of the challenges that we face, be they related to climate change, for example, the global financial and economic system, and of course, most recently, the COVID-19 pandemic, in terms of these challenges, they can only be met or they can only be solved through international cooperation, solidarity, and multilateralism. So I think it's very clear to many people that international relations, collaboration, and diplomacy are essential to our shared prosperity, our safety, and even survival. Lastly, young people have moved very much to the center of many of the important political, economic, and social debates that we're having at the moment. Most countries are grappling with the questions of how to engage and empower young people, how to address their concerns, how to include them in decision-making processes, and how to enable them to participate in the democratic life of their communities and their societies. So I think today's discussion is bringing together these 3 important strands, and I hope that we will be able to have this discussion in a very constructive and meaningful way. Now, before we can explore how a youth agenda can be integrated into the international relations and cooperations, pillar of the Harambee Prosperity Plan, we need to understand what this pillar is actually about. So the pillar has 3 goals or outcomes. The first one relates to our standing in the international community, and it talks about our international obligations. The second goal speaks to our ambitions to achieve economic independence with the help of our international friends. And the third goal relates to our commitments as a member of the African Union, and specifically the implementation of the AU Agenda 2063. And for those of you who might not be aware, the Agenda 2063 is the AU's blueprint and also master plan to transform and really reposition the African continent as an important global player. And it also seeks to deliver important goals related to social and economic development, continental and regional integration, democratic governance, peace and security, and so on. Now, a lot of work has been done in order to achieve these outcomes, and a series of periodic reviews and also progress reports have shown that we are very much on track for this particular pillar. Namibia is a valued and respected member of the international community. We do meet our international obligations. We have been able to mobilize international cooperation and support towards our development agenda, our development plans, in order to achieve inclusive, sustainable and economic growth. And we do actively participate in AU events, and we promote the implementation of the AU agenda both domestically and internationally. Now, due to time constraints, it's not possible to provide a comprehensive overview of all of the achievements under this pillar, but in this slide, I have tried to capture and present some of the most interesting ones or most interesting examples, and I want to maybe talk a little bit more, or highlight three of those, achievements. So one important achievement is the fact that through various diplomatic channels, Namibia has been able to enlist the help of our bi- and multilateral partners in the fight against poverty. We have been able to secure support for our drought relief and food security programs, and help, for example, in the form of technical assistance, financial and material support has been received from organizations such as the UNDP and countries such as South Africa, China, the US, and most recently Malta. As you know, Namibia is particularly vulnerable to climate change, and in this area, Namibia has done a lot of work in the international arena, and again, in order to get support for domestic initiatives, and in some cases, we have even been able to exercise a global leadership role. We were, for example, one of the first countries to ratify the 2016 Paris Agreement, which really provides a global framework to fight climate change. We are also a board member of the Africa Renewable Energy Initiative, which aims to increase and accelerate the development of Africa's renewable energy resources and potential. We have been able to secure funding from the Green Climate Fund to implement projects related to agriculture, natural resource management, in order to promote climate change adaptation and resilience. In the area of economic diplomacy and regional and continental integration, as a member of SADC, Namibia has ratified a new economic partnership agreement with the EU. This was in 2015, in order to ensure continued access for Namibian products to a very strategic and lucrative market, namely the EU. And in late 2019, just last year, we were able to conclude an agreement as part of SACU with the EU in order to ensure trade continuity with the UK post-Brexit. So as you can see on this slide, and also if you go to the actual progress reports, which are all available on the website of the Office of the President, there are many successes, there are many achievements under this pillar, international cooperation, international relations and cooperation. And yes, you can have a look at that. But the question that is being posed today is what can be done that, or to ensure that in the future, when we talk about these, future achievements under this pillar, we have a youth agenda. Now, this slide shows some of the ideas that I have about how youth issues can become more visible or how they can be promoted in the field of international relations, cooperation, and diplomacy. And in selecting these ideas, I have tried to focus on things that speak to the concerns and also challenges that young people have, such as economic opportunity, participation in both national but also international governance structures, unemployment, professional development, training, entrepreneurship, etc. There are many more, but I thought it would make sense to focus on some of these ones. And I also wanted to make proposals which are feasible, which are easy to implement, which don't cost a lot of money, and that will bring tangible value to young people. So let us look at some of these ideas. So I think one of the things that can be done is to create, but also institutionalize a structured mentorship program at MERCO, at the Ministry of International Relations and Cooperation, in order to empower young diplomats through knowledge transfer, training, and professional development. Now, there are many ways of designing or structuring a mentorship program, but I thought one of the things that could be done, for example, is to pair up young diplomats with senior, more experienced staff members, someone that the young diplomats can accompany to meetings, observe working, and go to for advice and support. And on the other hand, the mentor could provide or recommend relevant and interesting reading material and resources to their mentee. They can introduce them to their contacts, to their network. They can provide constructive feedback on their work and coach them in areas such as protocol, the drafting of reports, how to write diplomatic communiques, how to negotiate, plan events, leadership, and so on. I think it would also be important to have and to expand on the ones that already exist, dedicated and institutionalized platforms that enable youth engagement in international affairs and diplomacy, and that equip young people with the skills that they need in order to excel in these fields. Now, these platforms and initiatives must be capable of facilitating exposure, providing practical guidance, of educating young people so that they can really learn how to engage proactively and also with a high degree of confidence with issues related to foreign policy. And we don't really need to start from scratch here, because MERCO has done quite a bit of work on this. There is, for example, a proposal to establish a diplomatic academy, and there's also the Dr. Theo Ben Guirab lecture series, which takes place all over the country and informs the public, particularly the youth, about contemporary international issues and also Namibia's foreign policy. And I think that these types of initiatives, or through these types of initiatives, young people can be introduced to the world of international relations and diplomacy, and they can be prepared to have a successful career in this field. And I think this exposure and training is really critical. It is vital, because I cannot overemphasize the fact that diplomacy, which is really the tool through which we conduct international relations, through which we achieve our foreign policy objectives. Diplomacy is an art, it's a science. It has its own language, it comes with its own set of norms and rules and protocols and etiquette. And these things, these norms and principles and protocols, they must be understood in order to be deployed effectively. I also think that it is important to secure funding for programs that give young people the opportunity to participate in international fora and that facilitate their professional entry into international organizations. And again, this is something that MERCO already does to a certain extent. MERCO officials, for example, regularly disseminate information about employment opportunities, not just at the ministry, but also, for example, at the UN. They attend career fairs, they put the information on their website, they email this information around, and they use the local media. MERCO also facilitates the participation of young people in UN meetings and summits, but there are significant budget constraints that have meant that young people have not always been able to take up these opportunities. MERCO and other line ministries do not have sufficient funding, and also the UN, which does provide funding, only does so to a limited degree, so there's limited funding at the UN level, and as you can imagine, that funding is highly sought after by applicants all over the world, so our people have to compete with thousands of young people who also want to get that money in order to attend events. Furthermore, if we are serious about facilitating the participation and the professional entry of young people into the UN system, we need to find solutions to this funding issue, and we need to find out what is it that is preventing more Namibian applicants from securing employment within the UN system. So maybe we need to think about increasing the application pool by disseminating the information, maybe more widely or maybe on different platforms. Maybe we need to boost the quality of the applications by coaching applicants, by helping them to write their application letter, by helping them to prepare for the written and oral and so on. And
she's presenting on the end of AI.
We also need to perhaps collaborate with the language departments, with the foreign language departments and language schools, so that we can ensure that we come up with a strategy to help our applicants to pass the UN language proficiency examination, because this is also where a lot of highly competent and qualified applicants unfortunately fail. What else can we do? I think we can compile and disseminate a comprehensive database of funding bodies and programs which could sponsor and provide financing to young Namibians wishing to participate in international meetings and summits, even exchange programs. And the database can again be published, for example, on the Merco website, can be disseminated to universities, youth organizations, NGOs, and so on. Because there is money out there. There are foundations and NGOs that provide funding, but if that information is not readily available to young people, if they have to spend a lot of time looking for it, it's a problem. So there is something that can be done to make it easier for them to find that information. I think we can also create a program that seeks to leverage our bilateral relationships in order to secure scholarships, internships, and also training opportunities for young people with foreign companies and international corporates in strategic economic sectors, so that they can get some work experience and acquire skills. And by the way, this is not just good for the young people, it's also beneficial for Namibia as a whole. For example, when it comes to FDI, attracting foreign direct investment, because a lot of people are looking for qualified labor. They need skilled people so that they can innovate, so that they're sure that when they set up a business, a company, they have people that are capable in adding value to those companies. So on the one hand, we would be really helping the young people, upgrading their skills. But on the other hand, we would also really increase the competitiveness and the attractiveness of our local labor market, and thereby actually attracting more FDI. I would also like to advocate for the development of what I call a dedicated in-house policy towards startups and innovation at Merco. Now, what do I mean by that? What could this policy, actually do? So through this policy, Merco could, for example, lobby lobby bilateral and multilateral partners to come together with us, to join with us to create digital partnerships and international collaborations, for startups. And this can be done in different ways. You can, for example, do it through twinning arrangements, town twinning arrangements, city partnerships. I think the possibilities are endless. The policy could also lead to the incorporation of the startup community in international visits and inward and outward missions. This is something, for example, the Indian government has done very well. Every time the foreign ministry or other ministries, arrange international events, or if they receive incoming delegations, they reserve a space for a young entrepreneur, for a startup, for innovative, companies, just to give them that exposure and to create networking opportunities, for them. An in-house startup, policy or innovation policy at Merco could also promote Namibian startups and entrepreneurs at Namibia's foreign missions and abroad. And specifically there, the work could be done by the commercial officers, because I think there's a lot that Namibian embassies and high commissions can do, and they already, do it, but to increase the visibility of young entrepreneurs, of startups and high potential innovative companies, because we do have them, expose them internationally. The missions can, for example, profile them in their communication platforms, whether it's, Twitter, Facebook, YouTube. You can do interviews with them on YouTube, or just, on their websites. So this is part of this new digital diplomacy that we're also moving towards. They can link them up, the embassies or the missions, to foreign startup ecosystems. They can identify and target potential and possible investors and technical partners for them. And of course, they can facilitate market access and international expansions. As I said, this is already being done, but I feel that it's being done on an ad hoc basis. So if we have a policy framework and where we have targets and we can measure, I think that we might be more successful. We can also initiate and facilitate the negotiation of international partnerships to combat youth unemployment with bilateral partners with proven experience in this area. We all know that youth unemployment is a huge problem in Namibia, in other parts of the world as well. So we can seek partnerships with countries that have successfully combated youth unemployment so that we can learn from their experience. So this might entail some type of policy dialogue or exchange, or maybe we get technical support and assistance for youth unemployment programs, or even funding for pilot projects, vocational training and education, maybe some exchanges. We send our young people abroad to participate in those training programs, or we get trainers to Namibia and to train young people directly, or to the trainers training other trainers. The possibilities are again endless. Finally, I think more can be done to integrate youth development topics into the framework agreements for cooperation with bilateral partners. And I want to acknowledge here that, of course, while the final content of those agreements reflects, and it must necessarily do so, it reflects issues that have been agreed upon by different line ministries, which might ultimately be responsible for the implementation. MERCO and its missions play a vital role in defining those priority areas, which then go into these agreements, and also communicating those to our international friends. And in order to be specific and give you an example of, I think, why this could be so important, how the integration of a youth agenda in this sort of, in these agreements, what difference that could make and what benefit, tangible benefit that could bring to young people is, I want to tell you a little bit about the activities of or the work of the German Development Agency, the GIZ in Namibia, which has really in recent years supported entrepreneurship, SME development and startups in Namibia on the basis of, an agreement between our two governments, between Namibia and, Germany. So the GIZ, for example, has helped Namibian SMEs and startups to attend international trade fairs, to obtain training in areas such as product development and certification. And most recently, they launched together with local partners a startup survival grant. Maybe many of you have heard about this, which provides financial relief to the tune of 15,000 Namibian dollars, a grant to startups and small businesses which have been affected negatively affected by the COVID-19 pandemic. And it's worth noting that during the first two rounds of this program, 700 startups have benefited, from this grant. So I think this is a tangible, impact, and something that young people and young entrepreneurs can appreciate. So I want to conclude my presentation by saying a few words about good policy design, effective implementation, and also civic responsibility. So it's been said before, and we all know that the HPP aims to deliver a set of goals and outcomes which are implementable within a specific period, and also outcomes which are aligned to budget provisions. So the outcomes are supposed to be translated into activities that can be implemented, that can be executed, and also monitored by the relevant line ministries through ministerial plans and performance agreements. So while I think we can be ambitious and propose bold new ways of incorporating a youth agenda into the different pillars of HPPII, not just, of course, international relations and cooperation, we must be cognizant of this reality. And my view is that in order to ensure future policy success, we need to scrutinize the feasibility of our ideas and proposals. We need to have a realistic estimation of the time and the costs associated with their implementation. And we need to understand the boundaries of the jurisdictions of the different stakeholders who are involved, not just in terms of the design, but also particularly of the implementation. And with regards to the international relations and cooperation pillar, this means that we need to understand the mandate and the scope of the work of the Ministry of International Relations and Cooperation. We need to understand what actually falls within its remit, what is it able to do and not do through its various bi- and multilateral engagements, and what are the financial resources that are available for new programs and initiatives. Now, some of the ideas that I have shared with you today may prove to be relatively easy to implement, and they will probably not have significant budgetary implications. Others, however, do involve cross-cutting issues, and which means that they will require interministerial dialogue, collaboration, and coordination. It may very well be that while we find a new target or an outcome which somehow relates to international relations and cooperation, the implementing agency or the lead implementing agency or ministry will not be Merco, but somebody else. And lastly, also, some of the ideas that I have proposed might only be implementable if government is able to mobilize funding from our bilateral and multilateral friends and partners due to the decline in our national income, and also the diversion of public funds in order to address the COVID-19 pandemic, in order to save lives and livelihoods. But notwithstanding these challenges, I'm very optimistic that we can find a way of we can find a way to successfully integrate a youth agenda in the international relations and cooperation pillar. I do believe that young Namibians are capable of being partners, of being leaders, of being innovators in the next frontier of international relations and diplomacy, and that they can help us to find solutions to the many new issues which are emerging, and many of these new issues have been brought about by advancements in technology. And I do believe this is a topic or subject that many young people have a better understanding of compared to maybe other generations. And I'm talking about issues such as outer space, cybersecurity, telemedicine, cryptocurrencies, and so on. So what is my hope for today? I hope that young people approach the field of international relations and diplomacy with excitement, with optimism, but also with a sense of civic responsibility and dedication. I hope that they're eager to make a contribution, that they are prepared to work hard in order to advance our national interests. So this concludes my presentation. I hope I've given you food for thought, and I look forward to a lively discussion. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Doctor, for that informative and indeed eye-opening presentation on how we as young people can truly include our own agenda within our international relations and Namibia's foreign policy. I see there's already quite a few hands. I see there's already quite a few questions. It's written in the question and answer section. Please do continue doing so. But before I move over into giving you guys the platform to ask your questions and make your comments, I'd now like to call upon Ms. Desiree to once again just give us a synthesis of the two presentations so far. Ms. Desiree, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Chandre, and thank you so much to our presenters, both Martha and Mekonjo. You've done an excellent job conducting that review of what is working, where there's opportunity to do more, and really infusing it with new ideas that should be considered and onboarded into the next development agenda. What I do want to highlight is that if everything is a priority, nothing is a priority. Martha spoke about consensus building, and definitely the process of policy formulation is about building consensus on the main issues and the big issues. So we are taking note of every single suggestion that is coming, either through the presentations by the young professionals, through the Q&A directly to government officials, or through the chat room to everybody. We are taking a full record of this conversation. We are going to go through the issues. We're going to synthesize the issues. We're going to contrast the issues to what is already in the plan, and make the necessary adjustments where necessary. What I want to react on is, I think just brought from the chat room is, what does effective governance do for me? How does it change my life and actually deliver tangible improvements? And the president's narrative around the Namibian House is that the House has a foundation. For this House to stand, it is upheld by 5 pillars, and these pillars are the pillars that are in the construct of the Harambee Prosperity Plan. The very first pillar is effective governance. And our president has put it on record often to say that effective governance is the single condition that is necessary in order for us to develop. The opposite of effective governance is ineffective governance. That means that there's inefficiencies in the bureaucracy. That means that we would have weak democratic institutions, weak democratic political institutions, and that means that checks and balances would be lacking. So we regard effective governance as a condition sine qua non to development. The sub-pillars that are in there talk to accountability and transparency, and they talk to the quality delivery of public services. So the question was asked, I think, both by Martha as well as the two Marthas, Martha Nangolo and Martha Wilhelm. And both of you are talking to the relevancy of the indicators that we're selecting in the Harambee Prosperity Plan. A lot of them are international indicators. I saw some young people in the chat room are saying, so what does it mean if we are doing very well for transparency? What does it mean if we're doing very well for corruption on these indices? What does it mean if we have media freedom, press freedom? All of these are very important foundational pillars in our democracy. But I do want to add to that, yes, we are considering more contextualized indicators. We are considering the evolving situation, for example, with public trust. We are looking at including indicators that talk to deepening the trust between not only politicians and civil society, but other stakeholders as well. One example perhaps being the sports fraternity. We are observing a diminishing level of trust across the board, not only in our country, but across the world. And our president has always emphasized the mantra of transparency and accountability is what breeds trust. So the questions we are asking ourselves in this forum as young people is what more we can do to foster a stronger bond of trust between government and ourselves. And I think Martha Nangolo's presentation spoke pointedly to some of those things, and you gave very clear recommendations. Of course, our democratic institutions are being challenged now with the diversion of public funds with some of the developments. But that is exactly why we need to have strong institutions so that they can maintain the checks and the balances. And we must deal with them in a standardized manner so that the state and bureaucracy can continue to be credible institutions that are not in breach of the public trust. The plan and the NDPs, and whether there's a harmonization, how these two plans dovetail, and a very, very big and valid point made on performance management, review, evaluation, and the reporting culture in government. I just want, for the benefit of the House, to draw the distinction that the Harambee Prosperity Plan is an impact plan. It is introduced at the beginning of the term of the president, because when you appointed His Excellency, the president, with your majority, is because he had made a commitment to you through the party on certain economic development agenda. You have given him the tough mandate to usher Namibia into the epoch of prosperity. That means that he needed to formulate and to craft a plan that could talk to that mandate. So the Harambee Prosperity Plan is a very targeted plan. It's quite a lean plan. in terms of the number of projects that it can accommodate. And it actually, what it does is it looks at projects that are already existing in government, which present some low hanging fruit and can have a high impact. And it further provides the impetus in order to fast track the development of those projects. The NDP is a 5-year cyclical plan. It's working the nation on its way to Vision 2030. We are now on our 5th NDP, which is due for, I think it will lapse in the next 18 months or so, and that is due for review too. The NDPs, but the Harambee burning key issues that can have high resource. We are definitely learning from the experiences from the first Harambee Prosperity Plan, and I think one of the big lessons that we have learned is the oversight mechanisms and harmonizing the reporting and evaluation from the NDP, the sectoral ministries, and the Harambee Prosperity Plan. And what we're looking at is probably a more singular unit to have an oversight on performance delivery as a way forward. They say madness is doing the same thing over and over and over without expect a different result. So we are applying the lessons, we are learning the lessons, and we're going to make the necessary adjustments where they need to be made so that we can achieve a different result. On international relations, you did an excellent job, Mekonjo. I think at a high level, I just want to indicate that our foreign policy is a mirror reflection of our domestic policy, and we are making foreign policy for a predominantly young nation. So it talks to the aspiration of a youthful developing nation. But a lot of young people have also become second trade diplomatic agents as well, especially with the advent of social media and internet connectivity. ICT has greatly facilitated the participation of civil society in the sole diplomatic trade. We call them sole diplomatic agents. All of you are ambassadors on Twitter. The way you speak about the country and your expressions, they are a mirror into the Namibian society. A big part of our international relations agenda is economic diplomacy. When we were pre-independence and fighting for the political sovereignty of our country, we had a lot of international friends and solidarity who came to support Namibia. The president used the words that we have been midwifed by the United Nations, but we're a child of international solidarity. And that is true. And in this second phase, the same way the nations of the world helped us to obtain political independence, we are also going back to our friends in international solidarity and say we're now in the second phase for our struggle, a key pillar under international relations in order for us to translate our domestic policy into economic opportunities and development opportunities, not only for Namibia, but for Namibians working. We can continue the conversation. And I'll now yield back to our moderator to facilitate this conversation amongst ourselves. You may ask your questions, you may make comments, observations, inputs. Everything is on record. Only for us to be able
to. For the second session, I have 4 hands up, and I'll take them in particular order. Shaduka. Please introduce yourself. Please tell us where you are tuning in from and your question or your comment briefly.
Greetings, Chandra. Did you give me the opportunity to speak? Because my
right, we seem to have lost Shaduka. I see Mr. Dion Shekuza is also willing to give a question or comment, I'll now give over to Mr. Dion. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Chandri. Please confirm if you can hear me. Hello?
Yes, Dion, we can hear you.
Okay, thank you so much. Greetings to everybody, and thank you for the opportunity to obviously also partake and share our perspectives while we also learn. I'd like to just ask a couple of questions, but make some brief comments at the same time. And starting with the economic conversation, I'll just like to give one point that I often don't see being discussed when we talk about economics. And that's the issue of ethics. Because if we use the methodology of His Excellency that accountability plus transparency equals trust, then we are in the school of ethics already. However, we never translate that further into our business practices and stuff. One thing we could take from many other economic systems around the world is some of them are governed by either religious or spiritual or social or cultural norms that dictate how those economic activities will function, whether you'll ask somebody for some type of interest. And we as Africans, we often forget that our economic system has been dysfunctional, and therefore we've inherited a system like capitalism, which requires a lot of inputs from you in order for it to work for you. Otherwise, it might not work, because capitalism is the same system that promotes opportunism, last of a dying breed type of mentality, to say this, the weakest shall not survive, is only the strongest and the fittest. And these are type of ethics that drive corruption to some extent, because capitalism in itself is a system like that. So we must always consider ethics and bring that back when we talk about business, because it's important when you talk about money. Now, moving on to my initial comments, I fully agree that through honoring our international obligations, we can solve some of our domestic issues such as unemployment. And I'd like to specifically touch on one that Dr. Makondro spoke about in terms of climate change. I do agree that we are a leader, and the signatory to the Paris Agreement is one of those. And Namibia's nationally determined contribution is very, very ambitious. And we have seen a lot of funding coming into the country. Personally, I myself as a youth advocate, I can advocate for that, to say we have been successful in bringing a lot of financial international obligated funding for financial assistance, or rather more for development than over some aid type of specific support. And one of the challenges we face is, you would see in the papers, Namibia would almost bring in over 500 million Namibian dollars towards environment and climate and nature preservation. But if you talk about youth accessing these funds, is a whole different question. I'll name one, for example. We've got specific funding for, let's say, renewable energy. And the idea is that a developed nation, due to their pledges they've made in the UN Convention on Climate Change, that they are responsible for climate change, they would also lead the financing of smaller nations transitioning to a greener economy, have then been putting forward funding for this. However, one of the challenges we found is when the funding comes home, it's stipulated in the banking system we have, which often asks for things like collateral. Now, if you talk about a small system like a 5 megawatt, for example, you would already be looking at almost 30 million Namibian dollars market price. Now imagine you ask a young person to give you 30% of that. How are we supposed to get that? Even though sometimes the opportunities are there, there's always some strategic challenges we face. And it will be very interesting to see how we can work around covering that collateral requirement so that young people can get into these sectors which are known to create employment. And then I wanted to also kind of like argue a counter argument from the way we've been looking at diplomacy and international relations. Apart from the work we do, protocol, foreign affairs, meetings, submissions of documents and positions, one thing that diplomacy can also do for us in Namibia is actually we can take it to the streets. I've always been an advocate for using diplomacy for conflict resolution. We have a very vulgar and aggressive culture in Namibia. And most of our people they've not gone through a system that teaches one how to resolve and calm down a particular situation before it escalates. And I think diplomacy has a very, very important space in there. Teach our people how to negotiate. Maybe they might become better business people. Some people just don't know how to sell themselves, even though they have a brilliant thought. And one of the reasons is that one of our chief diplomats, the late Yoben Gurirab, was somebody that came from a small town. And my fear is if we don't govern how diplomacy is equally an opportunity for both Namibians on the better side of the economy and those not, we might find that this may become a launch pad for those of us who come from better privileged homes to actually get the opportunity to go study and go work in these international spaces. We should keep the space open for those who are coming from the bottom up as well. Now, my question to Dr. McConville is how do we connect to the Pan-African agenda? While I like the international agenda, I've found that it's really difficult to bring Pan-Africanism into Namibia. Before we connect with the rest of the world, it's very important to connect with the proximity, which is Africa, and you spoke about the Africa Free Trade Continental Area. We could see some benefits there, but an example to show you how it's difficult to connect.
Dion, I think we got the question. Just for the sake of time and for the sake of fairness, I've given you almost 7 minutes now. I'd like that we give an opportunity for your question to be answered, but that we also give another young person in the room the opportunity to ask a question.
Sure, Chandra. Thanks. I'll just leave it there then.
Right. Ladies and gentlemen, once again, when we do give an opportunity for questions, let's keep them as short and as brief as possible. We are quite a few in the room, and we'd like to give everyone an opportunity for their voice to also be heard. So the next on my list, and she has been waiting for a while, is Ms. Susan Muape. Ms. Susan, the floor is yours. You may ask your question or your comment briefly, please.
All right. Thank you very much, Chandra. I wanted to say, I'm Susan Muape from Zambia, and I wanted to first of all congratulate Namibia for taking such keen interest in youth-related issues. Now, I know that Namibia is one of the, it's the only, actually, it's a pioneer country that actually did a whole review on youth unemployment for the African peer review mechanism. And I know that by design, the African peer review mechanism is a tool that assesses governance, good governance, and looks at the strengths and weaknesses of a country and also makes suggestions. So I'm just trying to wonder how the presentations that have been made, do they take into consideration some of the outcomes that came out of the APRM report for Namibia? I know it hasn't been launched, but I know that there are a lot of good things that came out of the review that was done in Namibia, and they actually had a number of young people come up who were participating. And then my last question is just to look at the issue that was being raised around the international indicators. When you look at the example that was given of, I can't remember the exact title, but I think it sounded like it's a youth relief fund that has funded over 700 startups in Namibia. How effective has this been? Is it something that you would encourage even other countries to do, to give young people a startup fund, and what fruit has it borne? Is it meeting the targets? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Susan, joining us all the way from the Zambia. Apologies. I would like to then give over to the next person to ask their question, Mr. Isaac Rengura.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. Please go ahead.
Thank you. I would love to start by saying all protocols observed, and thanks the platform that have been created for us. I have a few questions as well as comments that I need to make. The first one is that on the desk of the youth advisor, I want to know at least the types of skills and experience that have been transferred to young people in our country from the first term of the Harambee Prosperity Plan up to end of March 2020. And the other thing that I want to ask is that there have been a time when the government was talking about a graduate levy. That was, I think, last year or last year under correction. But then from there, nothing, we never had anything regarding that. And we do have a very high number of youth unemployment, particularly to the graduates that cannot get jobs. And what we have been told is that we need to be entrepreneur minded. And my contribution to that is that why can we not introduce the course entrepreneurship to every university student as well as vocational training student from first year, just like we do it for English? Because if you go to university, obviously you'll have to do English, which is very compulsory. I think we should also do that in the area of entrepreneurship for all the fields that are at the university level. And the other submission that I have to our highest office is that we need to come up with a policy for internship, a proper policy for internship and traineeship, whether it's in government or it's in private sector. I'm an unemployed graduate. I've struggled to look for internship or a traineeship in different government departments. They will tell you there's no money. Even if you volunteer to say, no, all I want is just skills, maybe for 2 months or 3 months, because once I start doing it for 2 or 3 months, maybe there will be an opportunity in the near future that will allow me to apply for a job. But then they will tell you, no, we cannot do that. The same applies to the private sector. They tell you, no, we cannot do that. But you are just applying on a voluntary basis. So I think we need a policy that can compel every citizen, every industry in Namibia to accommodate people that need experience, because our job in Namibia is asking for experience, no more qualification. And then to the international relation, I like what Dr. Mekonja have said. I think what we should also do, as you said, is that we need to tailor-made our needs to such an extent that maybe we can send people outside the country, or we can bring in trainers in the country. So that is a welcome move. We want that one to be at least implemented, because Namibia have many wonderful partners that have experience in different fields. So if we send our young people to those countries, maybe for a period of 6 months, just to trade in their qualification and then come back, I think that will boost us also in giving specialized human resource to the country. And then the last question is, what is our take on corruption, gender-based violence, and tribalism? Are we just spectators to these things? We hate in the media all the time. I think if we as young people do not have a look at this as well, this is going to compromise our internal national security. So with these few words, I thank the Office of the President and I submit my proposal and my suggestions. Thanks.
Isaac, thank you very much for your contribution. And clearly noted of your questions and your concerns. I would now like to give over to the next person on the list for question, Tommy Charonda. The floor is yours. Please introduce yourself, tell us where you're from, and ask your question or make your comment. Tommy, you have permission to speak. Please unmute.
Can you hear me? Hello?
Yes, I can hear you now. Yes, please go ahead.
Okay, thank you for the opportunity. Firstly, I'd like to observe all the protocols already established. So mine is just a small contribution to the pool of great thought. Having heard all from the complaints to the motivation from the international relations, from the inspiration by our leadership, Desiree, I think we should get to a point where we have a specific youth-focused policy, one that explicitly empowers the youth for various reasons. It's twofold. One, they are the majority. They are the moving force of any society. Therefore, right investment and empowerment in them ought to have the highest return. That's my thought around it, but I can be biased because I'm young. And so basically just the idea is also on the second part of it, that so that we put more resources in more hands, so we move away from the economy of 10 people. And therefore the return or the spin-offs, the domino effect will then have a high rate of return. So with that few words said, thank you for the opportunity and the information shared. It was very educative, and I thank you.
Thank you very much for your contribution, Tommy. I'd now like to take the last question for this round, and then we'll give the officials with us today an opportunity to respond to some of the comments and the questions. I have Florian. Please introduce yourself, tell us where you're from, and ask your question or make your comment.
Hello, Ken, can you hear me?
Yes, please go ahead.
Yes, good afternoon, sir. All protocols observed. My name is Florian, I'm calling from Grootfontein. I've noticed that the common word that every other caller has spoken about this afternoon is youth unemployment. Myself, as chairman of the Association of Unemployed Artisans in Namibia, I would like to give a collective suggestion that was handed over to me by my members, so that government can at least consider implementing or constructing a new VTC, an advanced one that offers from level 4 to level 6, because as it stands now, most of the artisans would like to venture into entrepreneurship, but they cannot access the funding from the Development Bank of Namibia, because I'm very much aware that that facility already exists, but then most of the artisans are unable to access it because they are unable to come up with convincing business proposals or plans that would qualify them funding. And therefore, I'm just appealing to our government or to the highest office to at least in the second phase of the Harambee Prosperity Plan to consider constructing a new VTC that would absorb other VTC graduates that would want to further their studies and continue with their level 4 to level 6, because only from level 4 to level 6 the skill to become a manufacturer is offered, and that's what we're lacking, and that's what actually makes a huge difference between our Namibian manufacturing industry and the South African manufacturing industry, because at the moment, most of the graduates are only trained to become service providers and they are not manufacturers. So that is the only input that I want to give in this afternoon. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for your contribution and your questions. I'm sure they will be attended to. I will now give over to our presenter, Dr. to answer the questions that is relevant towards her expertise and her presentation. Doctor, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. I've taken note of some of the questions that I believe I can comment upon. Somebody was asking about the effectiveness of the startup survival fund that was launched by the GIZ and some local partners, for example, the Ministry of Industrialization and Trade. Now, the first call for this grant took place in May, earlier this year, and for that call, 200 startups and SMEs benefited. And the second call actually just happened. I think it was possibly last week or the week before. And for that call, 500 Namibian companies, Namibian SMEs and startups were considered. So I think we are very much still within that process. I think time will tell how effective the program is, but I think what is clear is that we need to have support mechanisms that help SMEs now. And I think an injection of 15,000 Namibian dollars is not intended to ensure that it's not a long-term solution. This is one of the targeted mechanisms that provide support to SMEs while we are in a crisis. And I think going forward we need to find that balance of interventions that address a current problem and that provide immediate relief, and interventions that really have much more long-term perspective and can help a company to survive and to make a company more resilient going forward over an extended period of time. Somebody was talking about what Namibia is doing with regards to, I think, Western Sahara, Palestine, those types of issues in our foreign policy. And maybe the feeling was that that was not sufficiently covered in the presentation. I believe on one of the slides where I was talking about some of the major successes and achievements under the international relations and cooperation pillar, I mentioned a conference on Western Sahara. And I think all I can say there is that Namibia continues to be very much committed to certain core values that animate our foreign policy. And we're talking about like decolonization, self-determination, Pan-Africanism, and regionalism. I think that those values are very much alive. They inform many of the positions that we take within international fora, for example, within United Nations, when topics are debated that relate to those topics. At the same time, and this is also what animated the review that took place of our foreign policy, we have to be cognizant of the fact that the world is changing. As I said, there are new issues emerging in diplomacy, in foreign policy, and so on. And there are new geopolitical, dimensions. So I think the beauty of our current foreign policy is that it marries, the two. On the one hand, we continue to be committed to our core values, our old alliances, but we're also looking at what is the world, today, and as the world is changing, are we changing with it, and how can we craft a foreign policy that speaks to these new challenges and new topics that are emerging, and especially, as has been highlighted so many times, the fight for economic independence and sort of economic, progress and development and so on. Then the issue of internships at Miracle and maybe foreign missions, was mentioned. Now, Miracle does have an internship, programs. Interns are taken up. I understand that they are attached to specific, departments, at Miracle, because of course, the issues of national security and so on. And I understand also that there has been a debate in terms of benchmarking and looking at what other countries are doing. I know that our neighbors have been reliably informed, South Africa, that they, for example, send even interns abroad, to work at the foreign missions, or even or young, diplomat. And so there are many possibilities. And I think I would also encourage, young people to approach the foreign missions in Windhoek. Maybe some of them offer employment opportunities or internship, opportunities to young Namibians. This is something that each mission has to decide, for itself. But there are internship programs at foreign missions in different parts of the world. I think this is something that each government has to discuss and decide, for themselves as to what is appropriate, and how that could be implemented. I do want to say something. This was not something that was discussed, but I want to elaborate or raise as a question, but I want to elaborate on one of the things that I have said about mentorship programs at Miracle, or mentorship programs generally for young people. Because I don't see mentorship programs as a one-way street where it's young people who are benefiting from the experience of older and more experienced diplomats or professionals. I am very much a fan of cross-generational collaboration. So I think that young people should also recognize that they also have skills, they also have experience, which is interesting. So a collaboration, a cross-cultural or cross-generational collaboration in terms of mentorship could also see young people mentoring older people on issues such as technology, social media, digital, anything related to digital issues, so that we really bring together different generations in teams, and we benefit from the experience, and we harness the energy and the potential and the skills that different generations have. So That's what I would like to contribute at this point.
Thank you very much, Doctor, for your insightful answers. I trust all the questions that were directed to you and are clearly answered available. I'd now like to also give an opportunity to the Honorable Emma, the Deputy Minister of Youth, Sports and Culture, to perhaps answer any questions that she might find relevant towards her ministry.
Thank you very much, Chandra. Thank you very much to the NAM Youth for that robust discussion. I'll just like to react to some of the few interventions that were made. But before I do so, I have to really thank the youth for these wonderful suggestions that's coming out. And it gives us really that hope that indeed the youth are at the forefront of developing this country. There was a question asked on the internship, to what extent government is ready to take on more internships so that the private sector can follow. On that one, I have to say that there was a communication from the OPM that is responsible for human resources in government, and some ministries have already started doing so. And in fact, I can speak for our own ministry. We have 2 interns that started this week, but through the partnership of that program with MTC. But definitely this is something that we also have taken cognizance of, that is very key, because it gives the youth really that work integrated learning and also that exposure. But also what we are trying to look at to address this issue is perhaps to encourage the issue of volunteerism, to see how various OMAs can also absorb youth to do voluntary work. And at the same time, we want to encourage, that patriotism, civic participation, and so on. I also want to touch a bit on a question that was asked by Dion, in terms of what is out there for those who will not have funding to bring forth when it comes to issues like the one that Dion mentioned on the renewable energy. And I want to refer the youth to the program that was launched, and we've seen the Minister of Finance a few weeks back in the newspaper launching this. It's the credit guarantee scheme, and hopefully that this one can bridge that gap then, because it do recognize that the barriers that the youth are faced with to participate in the mainstream of the economic activity is that issue of the collateral. And also coming to the comments made by, I think it's Rengura, who referred to that we have the issue of high corruption activities happening, and also tribalism. If you may recall, during the State of the Nation address, the President alluded to the fact that tribalism is in fact rife within the youth, and I remember the heroes at Twitter took on that, and some were disputing. So really, we want to also see suggestions coming from the youth. What is it that we can do to fight this invisible enemy that we know will hinder us from achieving our objectives? And lastly, I want to just touch on the one suggestion that came from, I think it was the last participant, who proposed to have a dedicated policy on youth. And I just want to share that one of our activities that the ministry is embarking upon is to develop what we call a national youth policy. And I encourage the youth to do some reading on this, because we have done quite a lot of consultations, where we held extensive consultation in 2018. Now, this national youth policy, we do have a version that is version 2, but every 5 years we're supposed to review this national youth policy in line with the African Youth Charter, and we are now currently at version 3. Now, this policy, it outlines the interventions to enable the optimal development of the young people, and also to ensure that the young people, both at an individual level and also at a society level, are participating in the development of the country, and also to enhance their capabilities to transform the economy in the country. So once this national youth policy is finalized, we'll then take it through the governance processes, and hopefully is also one of the instruments that will ensure that youth activities are mainstreamed in various OMAs, and also in various stakeholders. Lastly, Chandra, I also want to inform the youth that the Ministry of Labor, Industrial Relations and Employment Creation, by virtue of the mandate of employment creation, is also embarking on reviewing what we call the National Employment Policy. This policy again places emphasis on the employment creation, and it also then it's kind of mainstreaming all these activities together in order to fulfill their mandate of employment creation. So these are some of the policy issues and the programs that I wanted to share with the youth. And really, it's just to emphasize that we do value the input from the youth, and these suggestions is something that we really take seriously. Thank you, Chandra.
Thank you very much, Honorable Deputy Minister. I'd now like to next give an opportunity to Ms. Martha to respond to questions related to her presentation and effective governance. But before I give over to Ms. Martha, I'd also like to just let all our participants know that we are launching a poll which will be at the bottom of your screen. You can just click on it. Kindly fill in these questions. It's very basic, very short questions, just for us to be able to capture some data of the audience that's joining us today. Thank you. Martha, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Chair. And thank you all for the questions, the inputs, the comments. It's definitely been insightful for myself as well. I tried, Chair, to go on the question and answer portal, and I tried to answer as many questions as I could. Anyone that feels that I didn't answer them, please feel free to reach out to me. I have a few pointers here and answers and comments to some of the various inputs that have been given. I'll start off with Martha. She was, I think, the first person that put up her hand. She was talking about how Namibia has good policies, and she doesn't understand how this is not a reflection of what's on the ground. I think I just want to be able to kind of not champion, but I agree with what she's saying, that yes, Namibia does have a lot of beautiful policies, but the number one problem that we have is a lack of implementation. Hence why I gave the example of the Whistleblower Act, the Witness Protection Act, et cetera, et cetera. Now, in terms of how it reflects what's on the ground, that's then an assignment that's for me and you, in terms of if government then allows us in terms of public participation to be able to give our inputs, that's where then we also then get to modify it so that it can be able to reflect what's on the ground. Because at the end of the day, if we've got all these glorified policy documents, but they speak nothing to what it is that's in reality to what we're facing, what we're experiencing, it's not of any use to us. And then you mentioned, okay, you asked something about how, in terms of accountability, how then do we do it? It goes back to holding our leaders accountable. I think the biggest problem, and I think when we hear of accountability, we think of this huge word and we don't understand how to break it down. How do we hold our leaders accountable? It requires obviously access. It requires you going to them and being able to have a discussion and debate. I think Desiree made mention about how it's a two-way street. It's not just a one-way street, which I totally agree. Maybe I'll give an example of myself. If I don't understand something, it doesn't matter whether it's the president, it doesn't matter whether it's the Minister of Finance. I am aware that they are on Twitter. I'm aware that they read newspapers. I'm aware that some of them listen to radios. I put it out there, literally. We have executive directors at each and every government agency where you can go through them by sending them your letters, by sending them whatever it is, comments that you have. It does not always have to be via social media. I think Raquel, a colleague of mine, had mentioned something on e-governance, which was talking about what about the individuals that are in the rural areas. I totally agree. And someone also asked to say that she mentioned her village, and she asked, what about them? Over 80% of Namibians subscribe to radio. That's just over 80%. And that's just one media platform. There are other various platforms. And I'm sure that if we find, obviously, if we put everything to the table, we'll have some form of a good sample to be able to spread the word out there. I mean, it's 2.5 million. Word gets out very fast. Just to also conclude on that, it's just practically to make it consensus orientated, full stop. I agree with the comments that Romencia had mentioned as well. Esther had asked about, she had made a suggestion to talk about the jobs in terms of e-government. I know that the Honorable Deputy Minister had made mention about what the Ministry of Labor is doing, but I also just want to be able to put up a point that to say that the Ministry of Labor actually does already have a portal that you can access job opportunities through OMAs, and it's called NIEIS. And I encountered it a few years ago, I think 2 years ago, a year ago, when I was looking up a certain vacancy that was sent out. So I'd encourage Namibians, I think it was Dion, I think, that had mentioned that he's unemployed. Dion, I would recommend that you go to the NIEIS website. If you just type in Ministry of Labor Namibia vacancy portal, it will literally pop up. That goes again to issues of access to information. People don't have this information. People don't talk about this. If the Ministry of Labor itself doesn't put out this information, how people, Namibians or youth, know the opportunities that are out there? Dion mentioned quite a few things. I think I'll just state that obviously ethics is of course important. I totally agree with you. He made a lot of, he asked a lot of questions pertaining to how do we get here? What do we do moving forward? I think that's where all of us come together at a table. I mean, we've got a lot of technocrats, we've got a lot of youth, we've got a lot of experts, we've got a lot of policy makers or decision makers that have experience. And that's where we come together and really address the issues that affect us. Because I agree with you to say that a lot of times we put these things out and we're glorifying them and we speak about it for 3 hours and nothing comes out of it. That's now where the issue of accountability comes into play as well. In response to the vulgar and aggressive system or attitudes that we have as Namibians, I will say this much. At some point in time, I was also a very, very frustrated youth. And I'm blessed to know that I have people that are around me that could have told me at some point to say that, you know, you need to find a way to be able to articulate yourself in such a way that doesn't do any self-harm. I think the problem with us as Namibian youth is that a lot of us in our articulation, we don't think about the harm that our words do. And that's why when I started my presentation, I made it a point to say that as youth, we should be able to acknowledge protocol. And I'm not talking protocol about honorable, et cetera, et cetera. I'm talking about protocol about mutual respect. It doesn't matter whether you're the same age as I am, whether you're younger or you're older, there should be an element of mutual respect. And that starts at home, unfortunately. Now, I can't comment on how other people were raised, but myself being a Shwambo speaking child, up until this tender age, my mother tells me or she sees that I'm being vulgar or treating someone in an ill-mannered, she puts me to correction. And I think we also then need to be able to stand that across to other people that are not necessarily family or friends. Because at the end of the day, we're all human beings. We need one another to prosper in this world. I don't know, maybe Desiree or Chandra can comment on that vulgar and aggressive system. Suzanne asked about the APRM situation. Yes, I'm very much aware of the APRM targeted review report that has been done on unemployment in Namibia. It was very, very comprehensive. It's about an 85 pager. And yes, it's not public yet. And if you look at NDP5, if you look at the high level panel report on the Namibian economy, if you look at Harambee Prosperity 1, if you look at the MSME policy framework in Namibia, all of the major issues that have been covered in that specific document from the APRM are covered across all of these documents. Now, understand that today's exercise or session was only specific to 2 pillars. So obviously we couldn't go into specifics about other areas. For instance, if I have to just read a few things that are under the APRM unemployment report that it made in terms of the challenges. And one of the things that the APRM wants to do in terms of the targeted review group here in Namibia is that they want to be able to adapt a youth program that speaks to certain areas, certain challenges that the youth are facing, varying from building MSME data and information ecosystems, addressing issues of mismatch between education and training and labor markets needs, strengthening the ICT sector for youth innovation and employment, arts, sports and culture, creative industry, dealing with change of attitudes of youth, and enhancing corporate social responsibility for private sector. There's so many topics. Obviously, because of time, I could not go into all of these things. And I think one of the issues is because we don't have because all of us don't have access to this information, we kind of don't know what's happening. And that goes or stems back to the first point that I'd made when I made my presentation. If government is doing all these things and people aren't in the loop, people will start asking questions, even though the answers are already out there. Even if you look at some of the objectives that the APRM targeted review group has put out to give to government, of which currently they're already in talks with government through the Office of the Prime Minister. That much I know. There are about 6 objectives, of which under them there are various issues, ranging from VCT to ICT issues, varying from employment issue, even the topic of internship. And one of the objectives that I personally that I welcomed was how they want to be able to set up a youth coordination unit within the Office of the President. Whether they're going to do it through the Office of the Youth Advisor, I'm not sure. I've noted that Isaac skill transfer. I also really want to know that question. Isaac had pointed out a question to the youth advisor about the skill transfers between the first Harambee Prosperity. I really want to know about that as well. I think to answer Tommy, who was talking about what we should be able to do, as well as a recommendation, I think that was given by Dr. Mekandji, if I'm not mistaken, on mentorship programs. And I think also the Honorable Deputy Minister has spoken about this. I'm very happy to hear that the Ministry of Youth and Sports and Culture is putting up a national youth policy. You mentioned that those consultations in 2018. I'm very curious as to know who exactly from the youth fraternity was part of that. And was civil society part of that process when you were consulting? Because I didn't know, and even if you look at, for instance, the APRM report, one of the things that they actually point out is that we need to be able to have a Namibian youth policy that looks at some of the challenges that we have and addresses these issues point by point as action plans. I am done, Mr. Chair.
Martha, thank you so much for a comprehensive answering session. Without further ado, while we are a bit spot for time, I'd like to remind everyone once again to please, if you haven't done so yet, take a look at our poll. You'll see it down there. Fill in those few questions for us. It'll just help us to make these engagements a little bit better and a little bit more interactive. But since we're running for time, without further ado, I'd now like to give over to Ms. Desiree Matthias to please give her views and answers on the questions that have been asked.
Thank you so much, Chandra, and thank you for all the questions and contributions. It's really been very enlightening and inspiring. I think the solutions are within us. We have quite a clarity of purpose on some of the things that need to be done to improve the situation. I think the questions are, has progress been made from 2016 to 2020 with the first Harambee Prosperity Plan? The answer is yes. The plan achieved an average 70% accomplishment rate. But is that progress that was made enough to meet the need of the day? The answer is no. The situation is changing. The economy is contracting faster than the number of young people of working age are leaving institutions of higher learning. Is there more that needs to be done? Absolutely yes. And that is why we're having this conversation, is to acknowledge the baseline. And the baseline is that there has been a measure of progress towards the goals that we have set for ourselves. But that last 20, 30% is always the most challenging to unlock because that's usually got to do with structural reform. And the exercise we're doing here is so material because it talks to the president's reform and economic recovery agenda. And I don't want you to doubt how meaningful this participation is. I was listening more with an ear to understand and to pick up the subtle suggestions that are coming through than to respond. So I'm going to try to respond to some of the obvious questions that were put to me, and also just to make some inferences on the recommendations that I'm hearing. I think Ms. Muape pointed out APRM, and I just wanted to inform the meeting that APRM is a peer review mechanism from member states across the African continent. President Geingob acceded Namibia's participation membership to this peer review mechanism 3 years ago. And we were the first country to conduct this comprehensive review on youth unemployment in Namibia. The report comes with implementation recommendations, and the report was published in February 2020 to the African Union Summit of Heads of State and Government, and it was approved with commendation. And we're now waiting for our National Council for the APRM to finalize the modalities. What I can assure you is that the recommendations contained in this report will be part of the resource documents that are informing the drafting of the President's Term 2 plan. To respond to Isaac on skills and experience transferred, I think there were I understood your question in two ways. One is kind of to question to say, so what has been the role of the youth advisor in the Office of the President to drive the impact of some of the goals that we had set ourselves in the plan? And then the second part is to say, so what has been the impact? I don't want to get into what has been the impact because the President has reported extensively on that, but only to clarify that through these exercises that we are having now, the consultation, the mainstreaming of youth issues, we are able to put the key issues that we think are important to us as young people into the foundation of government and the country's development agenda. In 2016, we had not so similar exercise because it wasn't virtual, but we had extensive town hall meetings and consultations with the young people. And the things that you see in the 2016 Harambee Prosperity Plan were directly and indirectly informed by the young people. So the impact has been, it ranges, it talks from, I don't want to get into the economic indicators because that's reserved for Wednesday, but some of the indicators that have been questioned, for example, to say training and skills transfer, we identified that in 2016, the country was falling short on our targets for human resource development, specifically in vocational education and training. And what government did at the time to rectify is we prioritized TVET, and we also realigned the resource, the investment into that sector so that we could bring them up to speed. That investment was not only to increase the intake capacity, it was also to increase the footprint across the country. And those are targets that we exceeded. It has done better than, it has exceeded our expectations. We had only targeted 25,000 intakes, additional intakes by the end of that period. But I think we reported in excess of 32,000 intakes for TVET. That has been the kind of impact. So what I want to say, I think in a simple thought, is that this office is supposed to bring, I'm supposed to bring this office closer to you so that we can hear you. At the same time, you need to bring the issues closer to the government so that government can create policy that is responsive to a young country. There was a question by Tommy about specifically a youth policy, and I'm glad our Deputy Minister of Youth is in the room, because as much as there is the anchor ministry and an anchor youth policy that is explicit on our aspiration to develop young Namibians, I want to reiterate that the average age of our country is 21. If she was personified, she'll be a 21-year-old black female, and her name would be Namibia. So that means every single policy that government is making, they are doing so for a young nation across all the different economic sectors, not only specifically to the youth sector. But we do have some work to do. When it comes to entrepreneurship, I hear you're asking questions about funding and relief and the levy and all of that. I think there's just a confirmation that our thinking is aligned and we're seeing the same priority issues. And I can affirm to you that definitely startup capital, funding, unlocking capital access for entrepreneurship and innovation and SMEs is a big part of the economic recovery and growth agenda in a post-COVID Namibia. Cooperative education is a big one because with the contraction, there's a lot of job losses, but there are still graduates coming into the market. And we need to make sure that we can manage the transition of young people from institutions of higher learning into the labor market. At the moment, our country does not have a cooperative education framework. That means there's no law that necessitates an employer to train graduates or interns. I don't think you need a law to do the right thing. And some work has been done on cooperative education, work integrated learning. During the 2016 to 2020 Harambee period, we have launched pilot programs in partnership with private sector, where we have enlisted private sector organizations, employers, and kind of facilitated a matchmaking process as government to manage the transition and the exposure and the internships and opportunities. That also talks to the skills and experience question that you asked. What are the emerging issues? There's a lot of discussion on the chat room about culture, and I want to affirm to you that we see it as well. We see it as a low-hanging fruit. We see it as an opportunity to create jobs, and we see the creative and the cultural industries as a sector that is not so capital intensive, right? You can't compare it to mining and the natural resource sector, for example, but it can create a lot of jobs for a lot of young Namibians who are currently in that space. So we've elevated that as one of the emerging sectors for prioritization. In fact, we're finalizing a policy framework called the Services and Trade Policy. And one of the key pillars for that policy is the cultural and creative industries. So I think I've answered the question. The last point maybe is a point of reflection, which is the question, the very good question that Renguro asked is the tribalism, the gender-based violence, and all these factors that are plunging us into social fragility, but also can make our internal security more vulnerable. And I think we need to manage that process. I think everybody who has subscribed to this platform, everybody who has taken the time and investment to be here today is obviously a citizen that is positively engaged, who wants to make a positive contribution. And you don't see yourself as a part of the problem, but you see yourself as part of the solution. And we need to continue to necessarily have these open dialogues to exchange information, to create understanding, and to present the facts to one another. It's a two-way street so that we can inform and empower one another. I think today's consultation is testament that government does want to share information, to become more transparent, to become more accountable. And we definitely want to craft an agenda that is relevant. And I thank you all for being here. I want to yield the floor back to Chandre so that we can now move into the session where we report to you on a factual basis what it is that we think we have heard, what we're going to capture in our report, so that we can take this forward into the drafting process. And our repertoires are going to take the floor to conduct that exercise through the chairperson, Chandre.
Thank you very much, Ms. Desiree. Yes, and as mentioned before, I would still like to encourage all of us that are still online to please make sure to look at our poll that's still in progress. It's a few basic questions, and it will just help us better serve these platforms for you better in the future. With that said, we're drawing to a very short end of our program, and I would now like to call upon our team from the rapporteurs to give feedback a bit to us about what we've heard today, what we've recorded. And this is just so we are transparent, really, so that we walk away from this meeting fully understanding what the expectations from everyone are and what we've fundamentally heard, and how we'll be able to take what we've heard today and put that into the necessary documents and instruments to make this effective. With that said, I'd like to give over to our rapporteur team. We apologize. We're having a few technical technical difficulties getting our team online, but they will be joining us soon. Please stay with us.
To Q&A.
Okay, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much, Chandra, for giving us the opportunity to be able to give you the outcome of this meeting. I'll be reporting on the effective governance pillar review, which is basically done by Ms. Maria Mnangolo, who was basically the first presenter. What she basically highlighted in her presentation was what does the pillar aims for? And then, of course, one of the key goals that she has highlighted, it was on accountability and transparency, and of course, improve performance and service delivery, of which she put a lot of emphasis on the Harambee targets, which is, of course, increase into the Moha Ibrahim. And of course, she also mentioned on the more transparent country in Africa. And then, of course, she also mentioned the retained position as a country with freest press in Africa, as well as she also highlighted the 80% of the performance agreement target with emphasis on the citizen satisfaction rate of 70%. What was also quite, what came out of her presentation is where did we fall behind? And then she also put emphasis on fighting corruption, which is seen as a priorities. And also one of the things that she highlighted was public procurement still has a shortcoming. And then of course she mentioned also the media and civil society support, emphasis on the buy-in as well as the public satisfaction survey. And then of course she also mentioned the citizen satisfaction survey, which is nowhere in sight. And of course, she also mentioned on coming up with a specific KPIs as opposed to solely using international indicators, not to completely, I think here she was really just putting a lot of emphasis on the KPIs. And then another question that was raised was, where are the wins? A few highlights here on the tabling of the ATI bill, ministerial performance agreements, important, but consistency needed here. And then, of course, the assets and income declarations by the public office bearers, consistency is needed and need to be public. And then, of course, another area that was mentioned was the whistleblowers and the witness protection law passed in 2017, but not yet operational. And then, of course, she also touched on the e-governance. What should we look forward in the HPPII? It's another question that was raised, or rather what to look forward to operationals. The whistleblower and witness protection was highlighted, and asset effectiveness of the Procurement Act and making necessary reformed, as well as improve service on OMAS by incorporating e-forms, emphasis on the BIPA Home Affairs Airport Travels. And then, of course, start implementing opinion poll surveys across the different media platforms was also highlighted. I think what she concluded here was that on the HPPII, pardon me, was the accountability came out very strong. It's also very important for us, the consensus, pardon me, orientated, to be consensus orientated, pardon me, participatory as well, equitable and inclusive, and then of course follow the rules of law, transparent and responsive. And then how government service youth through HPPII. Very important that came out of a presentation to be proactive in making change. Of course, emphasis on respect include consult, accommodate, guide, and advise. Another area that in terms of the reactions and the suggestions by the participants, what basically came out as well was an oversight on implementations of policy. Implementation of policy basically remain a challenge. And then the question was posed, does the outcome policy implementation issues of standards of living, it was a question that was basically posed. What are we going to do on how will it, and how it is basically going to translate into results? And then of course, important to make sure that the implementation is basically done. Another focus on results, applied lessons, plus learning from experience, making sure that these results are implemented effectively. And then of course, key salient under discussions as raised by one of the participants was government run things. It's fragmented in terms of planning and executions, and also need to become more inclusive. And then, of course, cultural festival was suggested by one of the participants. And then, of course, e-governments on a job application was also further suggested. Quickly, on the extractions from the chat room pertaining to the effective governance and improved service delivery, what actually came out very strongly from the chat room was the citizen satisfaction survey, which must involve all stakeholders. And then, of course, ensure relevance on environment. And then, of course, coming back again to e-governance, access to internet and information. That is also one of the things that came out, the digitalization in terms of the 24-hour, in terms of the BIPA home affairs and the country experience. What was shared in the chat room was Rwanda was the country experience. And then, of course, in terms of government system needed to be integrated and can share data. And then, of course, youth empowerment and entrepreneurship crucial for our socio-economy. And then, of course, reduce youth unemployment by 10% annually by designing and implementing a sustainable youth employment and enterprise strategy. And then, of course, promote entrepreneurship plus support to youth entrepreneurs through skills development, provide technical support and finance. Here, emphasis was put on the grant without collateral. I have to make emphasis on that one. And then, of course, leverage the government procurement sundries by introducing a quota of 30% procurement opportunities to be sourced from the youth-owned enterprise. And then, of course, I think here another procurement act was implemented, but much hasn't been done. This basically came from the Q&A, of which Ms. Martha has already answered. A call for entrepreneur education. More investments are needed to build the capacity of both young plus women to transition from schools to work. And then, of course, looking for the value of capacity building for the youth, of which Ms. Matias also put a lot of emphasis on, and then emphasis on education on par with obviously what is being offered by the market needs. And then a chat room challenges that came out was assets income declarations by public office bearers and performance rewards. It's a serious challenge that basically came out. And then, of course, on the chat room, the data sharing, the lack of legislation, the Data Protection Act is still to be enacted. And then, of course, unemployed graduates lacking experience or by employers or being regarded as overqualified. And then finally, Ms. Martha Nangolo gave her contributions on accountability that actually requires access to being able to be in a debate, for example. Emphasis that she gave right there is on social media, radio can be a media platforms. And then she also mentioned that the job application, the portal is basically available. I'm going to give it over to another rapporteur, my colleague, Ndabandula Nangolo, to just quickly give you the international relations outcome of the meeting.
Good afternoon. I'm going to be presenting on the summary on international relations as presented by Dr. Mekondra Kapanda. And she did start with the previous aims or the aims of the current pillar, which is highlighted that Namibia is a respected and trusted member of the international community by honoring international obligations, and also support the translation of political independence in economic independence. Sorry. What has been achieved so far is technical assistance has been done. There is climate change projects, a new economic partnership with the European Union, just as an example, and many more achievements and there are still many more achievements under this pillar. She highlighted on what can be done. It's to create and institutionalize a structural mentorship program at MIRCO. She emphasized that also pair these mentorship programs coach them on how to write diplomatic academies. The second one is institutionalize platforms and initiatives that enable engage in international affairs and diplomacy and equip them with relevant skills. It also includes secure funding to participate in international forum and facilitate their professional entry. Another thing that can be done is compile and publish comprehensive database of funding bodies to enable young Namibian international summits. Those are for the international summits. Another thing that can be done is leverage bilateral relationships, example, scholarships, internships, and training opportunities for work experiences. This can be done by attracting foreign directories. You can also develop a dedicated in-house policy towards startups and innovation at MIRCO. This is to give exposure for mainly startups and lobby lateral and bilateral organizations into investing into these programs. Another one is to facilitate digital partnerships and international collaborations for startups, like she said, with, for example, GIZ. Another one is to negotiate international partners to combat youth unemployment programs, like training of trainers. Another one is to integrate youth development topics into the framework agreement for corporations with bilateral partners. I'm just going to go into what she said. What to keep in mind is to ensure that policy success through good policy design, realistic and achievable goals. These are budgetary provisions, boundaries of the different stakeholders that are involved, understand the scope of Ministry of International Relations, use ministerial dialogues, understand the mandates, the jurisdictions, and scope of work for stakeholders. Another thing that she personally said was combine personal ambition with civic duty and responsibility. These are some, I'm going to go on to some of the extractions from the chat room, and one of the outcomes that came out was see Namibia and MIRCO empower, develop, equip, deploy, and trust young Namibians with diplomatic roles. MIRCO can consider a training strategy by identifying capacitating youth with potential and develop or train them with diplomacy. These are mentorship programs and other suggestions. Namibia can also focus more on international cooperations, global solidarity, and multilateralism, advantage to enhance self-reliance and promote domestic manufacturing strategies and substitute import of services and goods. The last one is to look at M&E as a scientific program, as a scientific procedure, emphasis on evidence-based discussions and not just theoretical pen and paper programs that remain potential to this day. Thank you very much, and I'll hand it over to Ms.
Got us covered.
Right, we thank the team, the rapporteur team for their inputs and reminding us specifically of the main inputs that we received today through questions and of course through submissions. We're now moving slowly towards the end of our program with the last part of the program. And I'd now like to give over to Ms. Desiree once again to just do the closing for us. Thank you.
Okay, there we go. Hi, everyone. I'm back. We still have a good number of participants that have stayed with us until the end. So I want to say thank you very much. We are aware that we have run 10 minutes over time, and I'm going to try to be brief and succinct. The first thing is that we have taken down everything in the chat room on your Q&A. We have those records and we are going to include them in this report. This, as you are aware, is the first consultation on 2 pillars of the Harambee Prosperity Plan, but there are still 3 more very important pillars that we are going to be consulting this week into next week. You are welcome. You are invited to join us as we continue into economic advancement on Wednesday this week and social progression on Friday, the 25th. So that's the 23rd of September, Wednesday, for economic advancement, and Friday, the 25th of September, for social progress. And on Monday, we're going to review infrastructure development. That is the 28th of September. All of this will come together through a validation exercise. We are running a parallel process. We're also drafting at the same time. We have some of our team members logged in and they've been following the discussions. And we hope to come back to you next week with a framework of what the Harambee Prosperity Plan would look like and how your contributions have shaped that framework. Before I let you go, they say there's no free lunch. So you guys also have to do a little bit of homework for me. And maybe I should just admit that I need your help a little bit. We did start by explaining the theme and the objectives of, the many objectives of what we're doing here. And our theme, as you've seen, is that we're crafting a common youth agenda. And it is so important for us to unite under a common objective because there's unity in strength. We can champion together, we can push the envelope together, we can hold each other accountable on our common aspiration. And that agenda is, and we can articulate it. So my homework to you, my ask of you, is that you, during the process of these next few days, before Monday the 28th, think of a name. What should we call our admin will put it into the homework that I'm giving you. If it was a name, what would we call it? If it's open to all your suggestions, obviously it should inspire an agenda that wants to move us forward, eradication through unity, inclusive growth, and shared prosperity. But what is that in our language? What is that in our lingo? What is that in Namlish? What is that in our own spoken word? So think about it. If you have any creative juices flowing, please, you could tweet it, you could DM it, you could email it, you could WhatsApp it. We are so accessible, and I think you know how to reach us. So make sure that we receive it, and we will acknowledge receipt once it comes in. Somebody's saying, please repeat what should we call our agenda if we had to give it a name? What could that be? As a hashtag, what could it be? What do we want to see. It could be a single word from a youth agenda in a way that resonates with us. I see it's all clear up now in the chat, and you are all subscribed and diligent students, and you're willing to do your homework. Let me say thank you. I would like to thank our excellent presenters, Martha Nangolo and Mekonjo Kapanda Girnus. Thank you for accepting the assignment. Thank you for the preparation. You have done exceedingly well. You have really very lucidly laid out the issues and have also very viable suggestions. Thank you to our very able moderator, Chandra, to drive and to lead this conversation. I want to thank all of you who have stayed right up until the end, and even to those who joined us for an hour. Thank you for taking the time and the investment. We know MTC data is not a joke, but you clearly thought that this was worth the investment, and it really is. And you will see the outcomes of this consultation. It is not just a talk show. I really appreciate my colleagues. I would like to thank the Honorable Minister, the Honorable Deputy Prime Minister, and the Honorable Deputy Minister of Youth. I would also invite my colleagues, the presidential advisors who are following the conversation, and every single government official that I'm not recognizing who has been in the room and listening in. Your value add is appreciated. I would like to thank the team here that I'm working with. I have a lot of colleagues behind the scenes who are making this possible. We've enjoyed quite a glitch-free event, and I think it's because of their proficiency. So thank you to the team that is working behind the scenes, and we look forward to hosting you on Wednesday, the 23rd of September at 2 till 5 o'clock to discuss economic advancement. We look forward to seeing you again. Thank you so much and good night.
Thank you very much to Ms. Desiree Matthias, and thank you very much to everyone who joined us today from across the country and across the board.